Hello everyone. Welcome to the Encountering Chinese channel, the collection of strange stories from a Chinese studio. Now, let's begin with our first episode of these intriguing tales. Luocha Kingdom and the Sea Market. Ma Ji, whose courtesy name was Long Mei, was the son of a merchant. He was handsome, graceful, and not only that, he had a deep love for literature and the arts. He enjoyed singing and dancing and often performed with traveling theater troupes. Sometimes, he would wear beautiful fabrics on his head, making him look like a charming young girl. Because of this, people also called him the handsome youth. Ma Ji was also talented in his studies. At the age of 14, he passed the county-level examination and became a scholar, making him quite famous in his hometown. However, at this time, his father, being old and weak, had to give up his business and live a leisurely life at home. He often said to Ma Ji, "All you do every day is read books, but what good are those books? They can't be eaten when you're hungry, and they can't be worn when it's cold. Wouldn't it be better for my son to take over the family business?" So, Ma Ji listened to his father's arrangement and began to learn about trading. One year, Ma Ji set out on a business trip with his servants on a ship. However, in the middle of the journey, they encountered a hurricane. The ship was blown off its course and lost in the vast sea. After drifting for many days, the ship finally arrived at the shore of a strange city. When Ma Ji got off the ship, he saw people on the shore with strange and ugly appearances. He thought they would admire him, but to his surprise, they ran away in fear, shouting, "It's a demon! A demon!" Witnessing this, Ma Ji was also filled with fear. However, before long, he realized that the people on the shore were afraid of him, and he decided to take advantage of this to scare them. When he saw someone eating, he rushed over, and the person fled in panic. Hungry and unable to resist, Ma Ji grabbed the leftover food and ate it haphazardly. After satisfying his hunger, he wandered aimlessly forward. After an unknown period of time, Ma Ji arrived at a small mountain village. The people there also had peculiar appearances, but some of them looked more human-like, though they were dressed in ragged clothes, resembling beggars. Tired from the journey, Ma Ji sat down under a tree to rest. The villagers were afraid of him and dared not approach, only watching from afar. As time passed, they discovered that Ma Ji seemed not to be a demon and wouldn't harm them. Gradually, they approached him cautiously and attempted to communicate with him through language of partial understanding and gestures. Therefore, Ma Ji enthusiastically recounted his background, and the villagers were delighted. They told their neighbors that the visitor didn't harm people. However, those with the strangest appearances still feared him and kept their distance. The ones who came closer mostly shared some resemblance to Ma Ji in their features. They even prepared a sumptuous feast for him. During the banquet, Ma Ji asked the villagers, "Why are you all so afraid of me?" An elder among them replied, "I heard from my grandfather that, 2,600 miles west from here, there is a country called China. The people there have very peculiar appearances. Now that I've seen you, I believe the legends are true." Ma Ji inquired further, "Why is this village so impoverished? I hope my question isn't impolite." The villager responded. Our country doesn't value literature. They only care about appearances. Those with the most beautiful looks become high officials. Those with slightly less attractive looks become local officials. Those with even lesser looks become servants for the wealthy, trading their labor for food to feed their wives and children. People like us, who are ugly, are believed to bring misfortune to families. Many parents would abandon such children. And those parents who can't bear to abandon them would only let them have children and then abandon them. Ma Ji asked. What is this country called? The villager answered. It's called the Great Luocha country. The capital city is about 30 miles away from this village. Ma Ji asked the villagers to take him to the capital city to see it for himself. So, early the next morning, the villagers led Ma Ji on the journey to the capital city. After daybreak, they arrived at the capital city. The city walls were made of black stones, and there were many tall buildings inside. However, the roofs were rarely covered with tiles, but instead with red stones. If you picked up some red stone fragments and ground them on your nails, they would turn into red powder just like cinnabar. At that moment, officials emerged from the palace, and they all got into magnificent carriages. A villager pointed to one of the officials and said to Ma Ji, "That's the Prime Minister." Ma Ji followed the villager's direction and saw that the Prime Minister had ears that were turned upside down, and his face had 3 nostrils. Not only that, but his eyelashes were so long that they covered his eyes like curtains. Then the villager pointed out several other officials and told Ma Ji who they were. Ma Ji noticed that these people had peculiar appearances and were extremely ugly. However, as their positions decreased in rank, their appearances became less ugly. Not long after, Ma Ji decided that he didn't want to stay in the capital city and wished to return to the village. As soon as the people on the streets saw Ma Ji, they screamed and ran away, as if they had seen a monster. The villagers tried their best to explain, and only then did the people on the streets dare to stand at a distance. When Ma Ji returned to the village, news of the strange visitor spread throughout the Great Luocha country, and both adults and children knew about him. Many officials clamored to see him and sent invitations to the villagers, hoping Ma Ji would visit them. However, as soon as he arrived at each official's house, the gatekeepers would shut the doors. Both men and women would secretly peek through the cracks in the doors, observing and gossiping. Throughout the day, no one dared to receive Ma Ji. The villagers suggested, "Not far from here, there's an official who used to represent our old king on diplomatic missions to foreign countries and has seen many strange things. Perhaps he won't be afraid of you." So, Ma Ji decided to visit this official. When the official saw Ma Ji, he was indeed delighted and treated him as an esteemed guest. The official appeared to be in his 80s or 90s, with bulging eyes and thick, curly beard, resembling a hedgehog. The official said to Ma Ji, "Several decades ago, I was commanded by the king to go on diplomatic missions to many countries, but I never made it to China. Now that I'm over 120 years old, seeing a person from China in my own country, I must report this to our king. However, I have retired and haven't worked at the court for over 10 years. Tomorrow, I will definitely go to the Imperial Palace on your behalf." The two of them chatted and laughed, and the official treated Ma Ji with the utmost courtesy. During the banquet, they were halfway through their meal when the official brought in a dozen songstresses to sing and dance for them. These songstresses were extremely ugly. They covered their heads with white cloth and wore long red skirts. Ma Ji couldn't understand the lyrics they sang, and the melody was also quite strange. The official watched the performance and listened to the music, thoroughly enjoying it. He asked Ma Ji, "Does China also have this kind of music and dance?" Ma Ji replied, "Yes, we also have songs and dances." The official invited Ma Ji to sing a Chinese song, so Ma Ji tapped on the table and sang a tune. The official listened to the song and happily exclaimed, "It's truly strange. I've never heard this song before, but it seems so delightful." The next day, the official brought Ma Ji to the Imperial Palace and recommended him to the king. The king gladly accepted the recommendation and granted an audience with Ma Ji. However, at that moment, 2 or 3 ministers expressed their concerns to the king, stating that Ma Ji looked strange and they feared it might startle the king. Ultimately, the king decided not to meet Ma Ji. The official was helpless and could only inform Ma Ji that the king would not see him. The official invited Ma Ji to stay at his home, and he resided there for a long time. One day, Ma Ji and the official got drunk while drinking. Ma Ji then smeared coal on his face and began to perform a sword dance, impersonating the Three Kingdoms era general, Zhang Fei. The official was delighted and thought it was splendid. He said, "Please go to see the Prime Minister with the appearance of Zhang Fei. The Prime Minister will surely be willing to invite you to be an official. Not only that, but he will also reward you generously." Ma Ji laughed and said, "Oh, I can do it as a game, that's fine. But how can I obtain a position and wealth by altering my appearance?" The official insisted that he should do so, and Ma Ji reluctantly agreed. The official arranged another feast, inviting important officials who were currently in office to their home, while Ma Ji waited with his face painted with coal. Before long, the chief minister arrived, and the official asked Ma Ji to come out and greet the guest. The chief minister was astonished to see Ma Ji and said to him, "This is really strange. I remember you looked very ugly, but now you have become so handsome?" The chief minister and Ma Ji then joyfully drank and chatted together. After the banquet, Ma Ji began to sing and dance, and both the official and the chief minister applauded loudly for his performance. The next day, the chief minister took Ma Ji to the Imperial Palace and recommended him to the king. The king was delighted and sent a messenger to invite Ma Ji. After meeting the king, he asked Ma Ji how the king of China governed the country. Ma Ji detailed everything, which greatly pleased the king. Consequently, the king held a feast in the palace to entertain Ma Ji. While the festivities were in full swing, the king said, "I heard you are skilled in playing music. Could you play something for me?" Ma Ji immediately stood up and began to dance. He imitated the style of the great Luocha country's songstresses with white silk wrapped around his head, and he sang a song while dancing. The king was overjoyed by Ma Ji's performance and immediately appointed him as a junior official. From that moment on, Ma Ji often attended the king's private banquets and received the highest honors from the king. As time passed, the officials in the court began to suspect Ma Ji's disguised appearance. Wherever Ma Ji went, he could see people whispering and intentionally keeping their distance from him. Ma Ji felt isolated and became uneasy. He then requested retirement from his official position from the king, but the king didn't agree. Instead, the king granted him a short-term leave of 3 months. Ma Ji took a carriage loaded with gold and jewelry and returned to the mountain village. The villagers knelt down to welcome him, and he distributed the wealth among the people he had good relationships with. The villagers were overjoyed. They said to Ma Ji, "As humble commoners, we must repay your kindness. Tomorrow, we will go to the sea market and find some precious treasures to repay you." Ma Ji curiously asked the villagers, "What is the sea market?" The villagers replied, "It's a market in the sea where the mermaid gather to sell precious treasures. Merchants from neighboring countries also come there for trade. However, getting there is not easy, and it can be dangerous. Sometimes, ships encounter hurricanes and storms halfway through the journey. As an official, your life is particularly precious, and we can't allow any harm to befall you. You should entrust us with your money, and we'll buy valuable treasures for you. The sea market will start in a few days, and we need to prepare to set sail." Ma Ji asked when they would depart and decided to accompany the villagers to the sea market. The villagers tried to persuade Ma Ji to cherish his life, but he said, "I used to travel across the sea as a merchant. How could I fear the wind and waves?" After a few days, many red birds appeared on the sea, flying back and forth. Ma Ji and the villagers loaded their money onto the ship and prepared to set sail. The ship was large enough to hold dozens of people. It had a flat bottom and high railings, requiring a dozen people to row together to move the ship forward. The ship sailed quickly. In just 3 days, they arrived near the sea market. Ma Ji saw many tall buildings not far away, and the harbor was filled with boats of all sizes. He and the villagers disembarked and found the market bustling with business people selling their sparkling and rare goods. Ma Ji was excited by the sight. At that moment, a young man on horseback dashed towards them, causing people in the market to avoid him. Ma Ji asked the villagers who he was, and they replied that he was the 3rd son of the East Sea Dragon King, often known as the 3rd Prince. The 3rd Prince passed by Ma Ji and stopped, looking at him, and asked, "This person doesn't seem to be from neighboring countries. Who are you?" His servants ran up to inquire about Ma Ji's identity. Ma Ji bowed to the prince and explained his situation. The 3rd Prince listened and happily said, "Since you came here and saw me, it means we have a destined connection. Let me give you a horse. You can come with me." Ma Ji then rode the horse with the 3rd Prince and left the market, arriving at the coast. As they reached the shoreline, their horses neighed and jumped into the water. Ma Ji was extremely frightened and yelled in fear. However, at that moment, the seawater split open on both sides like 2 tall walls. They rode their horses onward into the sea, and before long, Ma Ji saw a palace. The palace was adorned with seashells, and the roof tiles were made of fish scales. The whole palace sparkled, and the walls reflected people's shadows. Ma Ji followed the 3rd Prince into the palace. he saw the Dragon King seated in the center of the palace. The third prince said to the Dragon King, "I was wandering in the market and met a scholar from China. I brought him here to meet you." Ma Ji hurriedly stepped forward and bowed to the Dragon King. The Dragon King smiled and said, "Mr. Ma, you are obviously a talented person. Your writings must be even better than those of literary figures like Chu Yuan or Song Yu. I would like to ask you to write a poem for my sea market. Please don't refuse me." Ma Ji agreed to the Dragon King's request, and the Dragon King brought out the most precious paper and brushes for Ma Ji to use. After writing the poem, Ma Ji presented it to the Dragon King. The Dragon King read the poem and praised. "Mr. Ma's writing is indeed exceptional. If we put your work in the market, it will surely attract more merchants to do business here. Later, I will hold a feast in my palace, and I hope you will attend." In no time, the Dragon King's palace was filled with dragon folk, and they chatted and ate, making the Dragon Palace lively. The Dragon King raised his wine cup to Ma Ji and said, "Mr. Ma Ji, I have a beloved daughter who is yet unmarried. I wish to marry her to you. I hope you'll agree." Ma Ji was surprised and delighted, and he nervously accepted. The Dragon King said something to the people around him. Soon, several palace maidens brought the Dragon King's daughter to them. Ma Ji secretly looked at the Dragon Princess, and she was exquisitely dressed, adorned with ornaments that emitted a clear and melodious sound when she walked. Ma Ji gazed at the Dragon Princess's face and found her to be incredibly beautiful. This made Ma Ji blush instantly. They immediately held a wedding ceremony in the palace. After the wedding, the princess left. Shortly after, the feast ended, and the palace maids led Ma Ji to where the princess resided. Ma Ji entered the room and saw that the large bed was carved from coral, with pearls and agates inlaid on it. The curtains around the bed were embroidered with beautiful pearls, looking extremely luxurious. The Dragon Princess was sitting there. The next morning, the palace maids came to serve them, and the princess's room became crowded all at once. After they were dressed and groomed, they went to the palace to meet the Dragon King. The Dragon King was delighted and officially appointed Ma Ji as the marriage envoy general, and circulated the poem he wrote yesterday among other Dragon Kings in different seas. The Dragon Kings from various regions sent messengers to congratulate him, and they eagerly invited Ma Ji to visit their seas. Ma Ji, dressed in beautiful and luxurious clothes, rode a blue dragon with many servants around him. The servants had their respective roles, some clearing the way ahead and some accompanying from behind. They arrived at the palace gates. There were dozens of mounted warriors guarding the gates, carrying bows and arrows and shouldering white flags, looking very majestic. On the way, someone played the zither on horseback, and someone played the flute in the carriage. In just 3 days, Ma Ji and his servants had traveled to various seas and paid respects to the local Dragon Kings. From then on, the name of Ma Ji resounded across the seas. The Dragon Palace where Ma Ji resided had a jade tree. The tree trunk was thick and required several people to encircle it. The thick bark was like transparent glass, enveloping the pale yellow core in the middle, which was thinner than an arm. The leaves resembled jade plaques, about as thick as a coin, and the fine leaf pieces hung down, forming dense tree shade. Ma Ji often sang with the dragon princess under the tree. As winter passed and spring came, the tree bloomed with beautiful white flowers. When the petals fell, they made a clear knocking sound. Picking up the fallen petals felt as if they were carefully carved, making them endearing. Sometimes, strange birds would fly to the dragon palace. These birds perched on the eaves and sang. They had golden and green feathers, with tails longer than their bodies. However, their songs were melancholic, sweet to the ear yet evoking sadness. Whenever Ma Ji heard the birds singing, he missed his homeland. So he said to the princess, "Princess, I've been away from my homeland for 3 years. I miss my parents and worry about their health. I have no way to contact them, and they don't know my situation. Thinking about all this makes me very sad. I have cried many times because of it. I hope you can accompany me back home to visit my parents." "Can we do that?" the dragon princess replied. "Our world here and the human world are 2 completely different realms. Therefore, I cannot go with you to visit your parents. Seeing you sad also makes me sad. I don't want to take away the joy of reuniting with your parents as a husband. Let me think about how to handle this." Ma Ji was saddened by the princess's response. She sighed and said, "It seems that this matter cannot be both beneficial and without drawbacks." The next day, Ma Ji returned home. The Dragon King said to him, "I heard from the princess that you miss home. I will prepare your luggage immediately, and tomorrow morning, I will find a way to send you back. Is that all right with you?" Ma Ji expressed his gratitude and said, "As someone living in a foreign land, I am truly grateful to be favored by you. I am willing to do all I can to repay your kindness. Please allow me to temporarily return home to visit my parents, and I will find a way to return to the Dragon Palace." In the evening, the princess prepared a farewell feast for Ma Ji. Ma Ji said to her, "Let's set the date for my return. You can decide when I should come back." But the princess replied, "Our feelings as a couple will end here." Ma Ji was shocked and asked why. The dragon princess said, "You are a filial person, and you need to take care of your elderly parents. Life's gatherings and partings are as short as a single day or night. Crying like a little girl now won't change anything. From now on, I won't marry anyone else, and I don't want you to marry another either. Although we will be separated by distance, we will still be a couple. We don't need to be together every day to be happy. Today, we make this promise. If either of us breaks this commitment, that person will have an unhappy marriage in the future. However, if you worry about having no one to manage the household chores, you can marry a maid as a concubine. There's one more thing to tell you, I'm already pregnant with your child. Can you help us choose a name for the child?" Ma Ji thought for a moment and said, "If it's a girl, we can name her Liulang. If it's a boy, we can name him Fuhai." The princess asked Ma Ji to take a keepsake, so he took out a pair of red jade lotus flowers he obtained in the Luocha country and gave them to her. The princess then said to Ma Ji, 3 years from now, on the 8th day of the 4th month, you can take a boat to the southern island. I will return our child to you then." Still worried, the princess took out a bag made of fish skin, filled with jewels. She handed the bag to Ma Ji and said, "Take this bag. The wealth inside is enough to support your future generations." Ma Ji chatted with the princess all night. The next morning, the Dragon King prepared a farewell feast for Ma Ji. Before parting, the Dragon King also gave him many gifts. Ma Ji bowed to the Dragon King to express his gratitude and bid farewell. Then, the princess sat in a carriage and accompanied Ma Ji to the shore. Ma Ji boarded the shore and got off the carriage. The princess said, "Take care of yourself," and turned the carriage around, gradually disappearing into the vast sea. Ma Ji stood on the shore and watched the carriage until it was no longer visible before leaving. Since the day Ma Ji embarked on his sea journey, everyone believed he was lost forever. So, when he returned, it was a great surprise to everyone. Fortunately, Ma Ji's parents were in good health, but sadly, his wife in China had remarried. This made Ma Ji realize why the princess had forbidden him from remarrying. It seemed she already knew everything about his life in China. After some time, Ma Ji's father suggested he marry again, but he declined and settled for a maid instead. Ma Ji kept the 3-year deadline in mind. 3 years later, he sailed to Southern Island, where he saw 2 adorable children sitting on the water's surface, splashing and giggling happily. They were floating on the sea. Ma Ji went closer to pull the children ashore. One child laughed happily as Ma Ji held him in his arms. The other child cried loudly, seemingly upset that Ma Ji hadn't come to rescue them earlier. So, Ma Ji brought both children to the shore. Upon examining the children closely, he discovered one was a boy, and the other was a girl, both incredibly beautiful. The children were wearing lovely hats adorned with the red jade lotus flower that Ma Ji had given the princess. They carried a small pouch, and when Ma Ji opened it, he found a letter inside. The letter read, "I hope my parents-in-law are healthy and safe. 3 years have passed, and the different worlds have forever separated us. Across the vast ocean, we have no way to know each other's well-being. I miss you deeply, but we can never be together again. Sometimes, I gaze longingly from the Dragon Palace, but I know it's in vain. Faced with the vast sea, my heart is filled with resentment, yet I can do nothing about it." This reminds me of Xiaoqian, who left her beloved and now lives in the Moon Palace. And the Weaver girl, who separated from her husband and resides in the Heavenly Palace. Compared to them, my situation is not worth mentioning at all. They cannot be with their loved ones, so what right do I have to complain? Thinking of this, I found myself crying and laughing at the same time. 2 months after we parted, I gave birth to a pair of twins. They can now speak simple words and understand what adults say. They can feed themselves and survive even without their mother. So, I am giving them to you, and to help you recognize them, I've adorned their hats with the red jade lotus flower you gave me. With the children's company, it's as if I'm with you. I heard that you kept our promise and didn't remarry, which brings comfort to my heart. I, too, will keep my promise and never marry another. I no longer dress up or wear pretty clothes. In my eyes, you're just on an external journey, and I'm waiting for your return at home. Although we are separated by distance, we're still a loving couple. However, I often think that even though my parents-in-law can see their grandchildren, they have never met their daughter-in-law. It must be a regret for them. A year later, my mother-in-law will pass away, and I will go to her grave to pay my respects, showing my filial piety. Our 2 children have a special constitution, they won't age or die, perhaps they will help us meet again. Lastly, I want to tell you to take good care of yourself. Reading the letter, tears streamed down Ma Ji's face. Seeing his children in distress, he gently touched their heads and said, "Do you know where home is?" The children cried even louder, calling out for home. Ma Ji gazed at the boundless sea, stretching infinitely towards the sky, but the beautiful princess was nowhere to be seen. He couldn't find the way to the dragon palace. Helplessly, he boarded the ship with his children and returned home, feeling despondent. Having read the princess's letter, Ma Ji knew his mother wouldn't live much longer. So, he prepared everything needed for her funeral and found a burial ground, planting over 100 pine and hawthorn trees nearby. A year later, his mother indeed passed away. As the procession carried her coffin to the grave, they noticed a woman dressed in mourning standing by the tomb. Just as they were about to take a closer look, a gust of wind blew, thunder roared from the sky, and a torrential rain poured down. In an instant, the woman had vanished. Even more astonishing, the dead trees around the grave miraculously revived. As time passed, the children grew up gradually. Ma Ji's son, Fuhai, often missed his mother. One day, he even jumped into the sea and disappeared for a few days, only to reappear on the shore, claiming he had gone to visit his mother. On the other hand, Ma Ji's daughter, Long Gong, couldn't visit her mother and would often lock herself in her room, crying. One day, as Long Gong was crying in her room, the dragon princess suddenly floated into her chamber. She said, "You've grown up and should have your own husband. Stop crying all the time." Then, she gave Long Gong a coral tree, 100 pearls, and a golden box as her dowry. Upon hearing the dragon princess's voice from his daughter's room, Ma Ji rushed in, only to find her in tears. But before long, a thunderclap sounded. After the thunder, the dragon princess disappeared again. In this story, the author portrayed the land of Luocha country with an upside-down sense of beauty and ugliness, and he viewed maritime adventures as illusory mirages. Thus, at the end of the story, the author commented, "People often like to wear masks to please others, just like Ma Ji covered in coal ash to cater to the king's preferences. Over time, such a society becomes like hell. People also often mistake beauty for ugliness and ugliness for beauty. This situation can happen anywhere. But if this becomes the norm, one day, when someone shows their true self, people around them will be terrified and flee, just like the people of Luocha country. When everything goes smoothly, the sudden fame, wealth, and fortune are like illusory mirages. Ma Ji can only possess them in the mirage, but he can never bring all of it to the real world." And so, we come to the end of this tale. If you enjoyed this Chinese ghostly story, please like and subscribe. We'll see you in the next episode. Taking the exam to become a city guardian in Hades. In China, there is a legend that after people die, they will turn into ghosts and drift into another world known as the underworld or Hades. In this realm, a unique social system forms, with many cities, each governed by a city guardian. If a person has done many good deeds during their lifetime, the city guardian will agree to have them born into a wealthy family or even become immortal. On the other hand, if someone has committed numerous misdeeds, the city guardian will consent to their reincarnation as a poor person or even as a captive animal. Therefore, the position of city guardian must be held by the most upright and selfless person during their lifetime. And today, we are going to tell a story about the city guardian. Once upon a time in ancient China, there lived a man named Song Tao. He was the grandfather of my sister's husband and was known in the county as a talented scholar. Song Tao was highly respected by his neighbors because of his noble character and kindness, and they affectionately called him Mr. Song. One day, Mr. Song fell ill and found himself lying in bed. In his semi-conscious state, he saw a man dressed like an official standing outside his house, holding a document and leading a horse with a peculiar white patch on its head. Curiously, Mr. Song got up and approached the official, asking, "What brings you here?" The official replied, "Mr. Song, you are summoned to take part in an examination." Surprised, Mr. Song questioned further. "But I heard that the chief examiner for the literary examination didn't show up. Why is there a sudden examination?" The official smiled but didn't answer directly. Instead, he urged Mr. Song to get ready quickly and accompany him. Despite his illness, Mr. Song had no choice but to bear the pain and ride the horse alongside the official. As they journeyed, Mr. Song noticed that the familiar path was turning unfamiliar. Before long, they arrived at a bustling city, which seemed to be the capital of a kingdom. They continued on until they reached a grand building resembling an official residence, adorned with a sense of dignity and solemnity. Inside, several officials in official attire were seated, but Mr. Song didn't recognize any of them, except for one figure that caught his attention: General Guan Yu, a renowned ancient warrior. 2 tables were placed at the front of the hall, each with a chair beside it. One of the chairs already had a scholar sitting on it, who motioned for Mr. Song to take the seat next to him. So, Mr. Song sat down beside the scholar. To his surprise, sheets of paper and Chinese brushes appeared before them magically. In no time, a piece of paper floated down with a title written on it. The title read, "One person, 2 people, with intent or without." Both scholars picked up their brushes and began to write their essays based on this theme. After completing their essays, they handed them over to the officials for review. Mr. Song's essay contained the following words: "Intentionally doing good deeds should not be rewarded, and unintentionally committing wrongdoings may not be punished." The officials read each other's papers and nodded in agreement. They called Mr. Song forward and said, "In the Hunan region, there is a vacancy for a city guardian, and we believe you are fit for the position." Mr. Song finally understood the situation and was terrified. He immediately knelt down and tearfully replied, "I thank the officials for considering me for the role of city guardian, but I dare not accept it. My elderly mother, who is over 70, needs someone to care for her. Allow me to take care of her until her passing, and then I will return and follow your arrangement." One of the officials, dressed like an emperor, summoned a guard to check how many more years Mr. Song's mother would live on Earth. Another official, with a long beard, brought out a book to consult. From a distance, Mr. Song could vaguely see names and lifespans written in the book. The official with the long beard read through the book and reported, "My lord, Mr. Song's mother can live for 9 more years." Hesitation filled the room. At this moment, General Guan Yu spoke up. "This is not a significant issue. The other candidate, Scholar Zhang, can act as the city guardian in Mr. Song's place for 9 years. When Mr. Song resolves his family matters, he can return to his duties." The emperor-like official then said to Mr. Song, "According to the rules, you should immediately go to Hunan to be the city guardian. However, due to your filial devotion to your mother, we have decided to grant you a 9-year leave. After 9 years, someone will come to fetch you back." The officials then encouraged Scholar Zhang with kind words before Mr. Song and Scholar Zhang left the examination hall. Outside, Scholar Zhang held Mr. Song's hand and accompanied him to the outskirts of the city. Zhang said, "My surname is Zhang, as you now know. My hometown is in the Changshan area. It's fate that brought us together today. I have nothing of great value, so let me offer you a poem as a parting gift." Mr. Song, still overwhelmed by emotions, couldn't focus entirely on Scholar Zhang's poem. But he faintly remembered Scholar Zhang reciting, "With flowers and wine, spring is ever present. Without candles or lanterns, the night remains bright." Mr. Song Tao mounted the white horse and bid farewell to Scholar Zhang, then headed towards his home. When he arrived back home, he lay down and closed his eyes, but suddenly, he opened them again. It felt as if he had just awakened from a dream. However, at this moment, he heard his mother weeping. Startled, he sat up, shocking his family members. He inquired about what was happening, and they told him that he had been dead for 3 days, and they were all grieving for him. Mr. Song was astonished and couldn't speak for a long time. Not long after, Mr. Song sent someone to inquire in Changshan. The person returned and informed him that there was indeed a scholar named Zhang in Changshan, and he had passed away on the day of their examination. 9 years later, Mr. Song's mother indeed passed away. After burying his mother, Mr. Song cleaned himself up and lay down on his bed, passing away peacefully. Mr. Song's father-in-law's home was located to the west of the city, not very close to Mr. Song's house. On the day Mr. Song passed away, his father-in-law saw him riding a splendidly decorated white horse, accompanied by many servants, passing by the front of his house. Mr. Song dismounted when he saw his father-in-law and entered his house together with him. Inside, Mr. Song knelt and expressed his gratitude to his father-in-law and mother-in-law before departing. The entire family was speechless, unable to comprehend what had just happened. After Mr. Song left his father-in-law's house, his father-in-law immediately sent someone to inquire, and the servant returned with the news that Mr. Song had already passed away. The author, when collecting this story, was told by the storyteller that Mr. Song Tao did exist, and that he had written some articles. Unfortunately, all of his writings were lost during the outbreak of war. A mutated corpse. In ancient Chinese culture, it was believed that people would turn into ghosts after death. These ghosts could generally be divided into two different types. One type was more ordinary, comprising both men and women, as well as older individuals and children. They possessed human emotions and existed in a different world. The other type was entirely different, often horrifying and malevolent, known for killing or devouring humans. It was this kind of ghost that people commonly feared. Now, I will tell you a story about a terrifying ghost. Please note, if you, like me, feel frightened by ghostly tales, I suggest you listen to this story during the daytime. In Yangxin County, there was an elderly man from Xiaoqian village. He lived only about 5 or 6 miles away from the county town. In that area, the old man and his son ran an inn by the roadside, offering lodging to travelers passing through the village. Several cart drivers frequently passed by their inn, carrying goods and resting at the old man's place when they got tired. Over time, the old man became acquainted with these travelers. One evening, 4 cart drivers arrived at the old man's inn, seeking accommodation. However, all the rooms were already occupied. The drivers were exhausted and unable to make it to the county town before dark. They pleaded with the old man to find a solution for them. The old man thought for a moment and finally came up with a place for them to stay, albeit hesitantly. Dear guests, my daughter-in-law has just passed away, and her body is laid out in the house. My son is not at home. He went to buy wood for the coffin and won't be back today. Thus, that room is empty for now, and there's a large bed inside. If you don't mind, I can take you there to rest. The cart drivers were a little concerned, but considering that they were in a group of 4, they agreed. So, the old man led them to his son's residence. Inside the room, they saw a wooden table with a dimly lit oil lamp on it. Behind the table, there were white mourning curtains hung for the deceased. Through the curtains, they could faintly make out the figure of a person lying flat, likely the old man's daughter-in-law. On the other side of the room was a bedroom with a large bed, spacious enough for all 4 of them to sleep on. The cart drivers were utterly exhausted, and the sight of the bed made them even sleepier. Without hesitation, they lay down on the bed, and soon, the room filled with the sound of snoring. However, one of the cart drivers couldn't fall into a deep sleep. He felt somewhat scared and was lying half awake, half asleep. Suddenly, he heard a faint clicking sound coming from the area of the mourning altar. He opened his eyes hastily and looked towards the altar. Since the bedroom was dark, the living room appeared relatively bright, and he could see things clearly. To his astonishment, the corpse of the woman lifted the paper covering her body and sat up straight. What's more, she stood up and slowly walked into the bedroom. The cart driver could see the woman's face with a pale yellow hue and a white cloth tied around her head. The woman approached the big bed and bent over, blowing her breath directly onto the faces of each of the 4 cart drivers. The awake driver was terrified and afraid that the woman's breath would also reach his face. He quickly covered his head with the blanket and held his breath. The cart driver listened silently to the sounds outside his blanket. Before long, the female corpse indeed approached him. Just like with the other cart drivers, the female corpse blew her breath at him and then walked out of the bedroom. The cart driver faintly heard the footsteps of the female corpse getting farther away, as if she had left the room. After a while, he heard the sound of moving paper. The cart driver cautiously peeked out from under the blanket to observe the living room, and he saw the female corpse lying stiffly in her original position. The cart driver was overcome with extreme fear. He didn't dare make a sound and secretly nudged the person next to him with his foot, but that person remained motionless, showing no response at all. The cart driver had no other option but to think. I should put on my clothes and escape. With this thought, he sat up and prepared to grab his clothes. Just then, the clicking sound started again. The cart driver was terrified. He didn't dare move and could only slowly lie back down, hiding his head back under the blanket. He faintly heard the female corpse returning to him, blowing air on him multiple times before finally leaving. After a while, he heard the sound of the female corpse returning to her lying position on the morning bed. The cart driver knew that the female corpse must have returned to her original spot. The cart driver attempted to grab his clothes again, and this time, he finally managed to seize his pants. The cart driver hastily put on his pants and ran out barefoot. It seemed like the female corpse heard the noise and started chasing after the fleeing cart driver. However, by the time she reached the side of the morning bed, the cart driver had already opened the room's door and escaped. So, the female corpse pursued the cart driver. He ran while shouting loudly, trying to wake up the neighbors around him. But inexplicably, no one in the village woke up. The cart driver wanted to knock on the innkeeper's door, but he was afraid of delaying and letting the female corpse catch up to him. Therefore, the cart driver desperately ran along the road leading to the county town, heading in the direction of the town with all his might. As he ran, the cart driver saw a temple and even faintly heard the chanting of monks inside. He felt that he had found someone who could save him, so he quickened his pace and ran to the side of the temple, knocking on the temple door. The monks inside the temple were surprised to hear the urgent knocking from outside, and they took their time responding to the person at the door. Just then, the female corpse had already caught up, and she was only about a meter away from him. The cart driver was extremely frightened. Fortunately, there was a large poplar tree outside the temple with a thick trunk. The cart driver ran to the back of the tree, trying to evade the pursuit of the female corpse. The female corpse lunged towards the right side of the tree, and the cart driver escaped to the left. When the female corpse lunged to the left, the cart driver dodged to the right. Unable to catch the cart driver, the female corpse became even more agitated. After a while, the female corpse suddenly stopped and stood still. The cart driver also halted, gasping for breath and appearing exhausted. Suddenly, the female corpse lunged fiercely towards the front of the tree. She extended her arms, reaching out from both sides of the tree trunk to grab the cart driver. The cart driver was so frightened that he fell to the ground. Unexpectedly, the female corpse tightly clung to the tree trunk and gradually became stiff. Inside the temple, the monks had been secretly listening for a long time. When they heard no more sounds, they cautiously came out. They saw the cart driver lying on the ground and, using the light from a lamp, examined him. He seemed to be dead. A brave old monk reached out to touch the cart driver's chest and found that his heart was still beating, and there was still some warmth in his body. So, the monks quickly carried the cart driver into the temple. After a night of treatment, the cart driver gradually woke up. The monks gave him some hot water and asked him about what had happened the previous night. The cart driver detailed his experience to the monks. By this time, the morning bell had already rung, and with the morning sunlight, the monks went to inspect the poplar tree. Sure enough, they saw a female corpse tightly hugging the tree trunk, her body already stiff. The monks were all frightened and quickly informed the local official. The official personally went to the scene to investigate. He asked his assistant to pull the female corpse down from the tree, but no matter how hard the assistant tried, he couldn't do it. After a careful examination, they discovered that the female corpse had long, sharp nails on both hands, deeply embedded into the tree trunk. The official then had several people together exert force to finally pull the female corpse down from the tree. The official sent people to inquire at the inn, and the person returned with a report that the inn had indeed lost a female corpse last night, and all the cart drivers staying there had died. The inn was now in chaos, and the owner was preparing to report the incident to the official. The person continued, "I told the innkeeper about what happened here, and he has come here with me." The innkeeper, an old man, walked over and saw his daughter-in-law with a terrifying face and twisted body. He burst into tears. After crying, he had the female corpse carried back home. The only surviving cart driver, witnessing all of this, finally broke into tears and said to the official, "Sir, when we came here, there were 4 of us, and now there's only me left. This whole thing is too strange. How can the families of the other 3 believe it?" The official nodded and said, "I understand that you're grieving, but the incident has already happened. I will write you a letter of certification to ensure that the families of the deceased can believe it. Additionally, I'll provide you with some money as compensation for the deceased's families." Today's story is about ancient Chinese understanding of zombies. In ancient times, zombies were believed to be transformed from the dead. They couldn't walk and could only hop. They also had long, sharp nails and teeth, giving them a frightening appearance. These zombies were believed to consume the souls of the living, and they were stubborn creatures. Once they clung onto something, they would hold on tightly and never let go. Spitting water. In ancient times, during the period when Mr. Song Yushu from Liulang served as a local official, he once rented an extremely remote house. To take better care of his elderly mother, Mr. Song had her and the servants move in with him. One night, while Mr. Song was fast asleep in his bedroom, the 2 servants were chatting with his mother in her room. Suddenly, they heard the sound of water spouting in the courtyard, much like a tailor spraying water on clothes. Intrigued, Mr. Song's mother urged the servants to go and see what was happening outside. The servants were a bit scared, so they discreetly made a small hole in the window paper to peep outside. There, they saw an old lady standing in the courtyard. She was short and hunched, with hair like a broom and a 2-foot-long bun on her head. The old lady kept circling the well in the yard, walking in a strange manner, like a majestic crane taking large, jerky strides. Her movements were eerie as she seemed to be spitting water from her mouth continuously, as if she had an endless reservoir inside her. The servants were astonished by what they saw and immediately rushed to Mr. Song's mother to describe everything they had witnessed. Frightened, Mr. Song's mother stood up, and with the support of the servants, approached the window to see what was really going on. Suddenly, the old lady in the courtyard turned her head, facing Mr. Song's mother's window, and kept coming closer. Step by step, she reached the window and began spitting water towards the window frames. The window paper was instantly broken by the water, and all 3 people inside the room fell to the ground, but Mr. Song was still completely unaware of what was happening. The next morning, when Mr. Song woke up and tried to visit his mother, there was no response no matter how hard he knocked on her bedroom door. Panicking, he quickly fetched tools and pried open the door. To his shock, his mother and the 2 servants were lying side by side on the floor. His mother and one of the servants had already passed away, but the other servant seemed to still be alive. Mr. Song helped the servant drink some warm water, and after a long while, she slowly opened her eyes. The servant was weak and recounted in fragments what had happened. Deeply saddened and amazed, Mr. Song thoroughly investigated the spot where the old lady appeared in the courtyard and had a hole dug more than 3 feet deep. As they dug, they found strands of white hair poking out. As they continued, they unearthed a corpse. Mr. Song carefully examined the body and discovered that it was the same old lady the servant had described seeing last night. This corpse had been buried here for an unknown period, yet its face looked as if it belonged to a living person, without any signs of decay. Fuming with anger, Mr. Song ordered the servants to fiercely beat the corpse with sticks. Strangely, there was no blood, and all that came out was clear water. This story tells of a malevolent ghost, a common belief in ancient China. People sometimes thought that those who died with resentment would transform into malevolent ghosts. They would harbor grudges within themselves or in certain objects, much like curses. When people unintentionally lived in a house with malevolent ghosts or used objects with lingering resentment, these malevolent ghosts would unreasonably kill them. Historically, there was indeed a person named Song Yushu, a well-known poet during the Qing dynasty. However, he suffered a difficult fate, having been falsely accused twice and ultimately dying away from home at the age of 59. In the story, the author draws parallels between Mr. Song and his deceased mother, and the old lady who spits water represents the symbol of the villains who falsely accused him. Finally, Mr. Song beating the old lady also represents the author's hope for those villains to be punished. Tiny people in an ear. Tan Jinxian was a student at the county school who was deeply obsessed with practicing Qigong for health and longevity. Regardless of whether it was the freezing winter or scorching summer, he persisted in his practice without interruption. After some time of training, he believed that his cultivation had made progress. One day, while he was meditating in a cross-legged position, he suddenly heard a voice in his ear, sounding like a fly buzzing softly, saying, "You can come out now." Tan Jinxian opened his eyes upon hearing the voice, but there was no one in sight. Thinking he must have misheard, he closed his eyes again and continued his practice. However, after a while, he heard the voice again. This time, he believed that his inner alchemy was about to be successful, and he felt delighted. From that moment on, whenever he practiced Qigong, he would hear someone whispering in his ear. Curious, he thought. What if I respond when I hear the voice again? One day, he heard the voice in his ear once more, and he softly replied, "You can come out now." Shortly after, he felt a sharp pain and itch in his ear, as if something was really coming out. Sneaking a glance at his shoulder, he discovered a tiny person, about 3 inches tall, standing there. The tiny person had an ugly and grotesque appearance, resembling a demon or a ghoul. It jumped to the ground and scurried around like a frightened mouse without finding an escape route. Tan Jinxian was astonished as he watched the tiny person and kept observing to see what would happen. Suddenly, someone knocked on the door from outside. It seemed like a neighbor who wanted to borrow something. The neighbor kept knocking and calling Tan Jinxian's name. The tiny person heard the knocking and appeared in a state of panic, continuously running around the room as if it couldn't find a way out. Tan Jinxian's consciousness started to blur, as if his soul was leaving his body. He continued to gaze at the tiny person until it disappeared before his eyes. From that day on, Tan Jinxian became foolish and kept howling incessantly. His family had no choice but to take him to seek medical treatment. It took over half a year for him to gradually recover. In ancient China, many people pursued the idea of immortality and were obsessed with various methods of cultivating health and longevity. They often consumed strange substances, firmly believing in their effects. However, they were unaware that these substances often contained toxic elements, leading to hallucinations and even life-threatening situations. Perhaps this story serves as a cautionary tale about such practices. Wang Liulang. In ancient China, there is a legend like this. If a person drowns in a river and dies unnaturally, their soul will linger in the watery area where they perished, transforming into a water ghost. These water ghosts retain human emotions and memories. If they were kind during their lifetime, they become benevolent spirits. If they were malicious, they become malevolent ghosts. However, these water ghosts are incredibly pitiable. Not only are they unable to leave the area where they drowned, but they also endure the icy currents of the river and endless solitude each day. Their only chance of departure is to find someone who drowned in the same waters during a specific time and take their place. Upon leaving the watery domain, these water ghosts generally transform back into humans. Only a tiny minority of exceptionally virtuous water ghosts achieve immortal status and eternal life. And now, the story we're about to tell is related to these water ghosts. There was a man surnamed Su who lived in the northern part of Sichuan, engaging in fishing as his profession. Every night, he would bring along some wine and go to the riverbank, where he would drink and fish simultaneously. Every time Su drank, he would pour a cup of wine onto the ground as an offering, then facing the river, he would pray. "Oh, water ghost of the river, please come and have a drink here?" His neighbors found him quite peculiar, but as time went on, they got used to it. What was even more strange was that while others couldn't catch many fish in that area, Su would always manage to fill his basket with fish each time. One evening, Su was again pouring himself a drink by the shore when a young man came by and started pacing around him, unwilling to leave. Seeing the young man, Su smiled and invited him to join him for a drink. To his surprise, the young man accepted without hesitation, sitting down and sharing a drink with Su. As a result, they spent the entire night by the riverside, but Su didn't catch a single fish. Feeling disappointed, Su was about to leave when the young man stood up and said, "To thank you for inviting me to drink, let me go downstream and drive the fish towards you." With that, the young man left in a carefree manner. Not long after, he returned and said, "Many fish have arrived. Hurry and catch them." True to his words, not much time passed before Su heard the sounds of fish splashing in the river. Overjoyed, he quickly cast his fishing net. This time, he caught several fish, each over a foot long. Su thanked the young man profusely, but the young man just smiled without saying a word. When Su was about to head home, he wanted to give the largest fish to the young man, but the young man refused. He told Su, "I'm very grateful for the good wine you've treated me to multiple times. Helping you with fishing is a small matter and doesn't count as repayment. If you don't mind, I hope we can often drink and fish together in the future." This puzzled Su, and he said, "We've only spent one evening drinking together. How can you say it's multiple times? If you're willing to join me for drinks frequently, that's what I hope for as well. I'm just ashamed that I can't repay you for helping me catch fish." Su also asked the young man's name, to which he replied, "My surname is Wang. You can call me Wang Liulang." After this exchange, the two went their separate ways. The next day, Su sold the fish he caught the previous night and used the money to buy more wine. In the evening, he eagerly returned to the riverbank, only to find that the young man had already arrived. They happily began drinking together once more. After a few drinks, the young man got up and went to help Su catch fish again. Time flew by, and for half a year, the two of them drank and fished together every night. One day, the young man suddenly told Su, "Since we met, our bond has become stronger than that of real brothers. But now, the day of our parting is approaching." His expression turned sorrowful as he spoke. Su was taken aback by the young man's words and asked in surprise what was going on. The young man hesitated to speak a few times but finally opened up. He said, "I believe our friendship has deepened greatly. You might not be surprised when I tell you the truth. Now, the time has come for us to part ways, so I might as well share everything with you. I hope you won't be frightened. The truth is, I'm not a human. I'm a water ghost. When I was alive, I loved drinking. One day, I got drunk and accidentally drowned here. It's been several years since that happened. The reason you've caught more fish than others in the past is that I secretly helped you drive the fish towards your net. I did this mainly to repay your gesture of pouring wine before each fishing trip. Drinking myself to death was a crime. Tomorrow, my sentence will be completed. Someone else will come to replace me as the water ghost here, and I will be reborn as a human in the mortal realm. Despite our deep friendship, we only have tonight to be together. Thinking about the permanent separation makes me really sad. Upon hearing that Liulang was a ghost, Su was initially terrified. However, after spending so much time drinking and chatting together, he gradually became less afraid. Su listened to Liulang's story and felt reluctant to say goodbye, sighing sadly. He raised his glass to Liulang and said, "Liulang, let's not be sad anymore. Although we haven't known each other for long, our bond is strong. You leaving is, of course, a sorrowful event. But according to what you've said, you're here to atone for your wrongdoing. Your sentence is now over, and you can finally escape the cycle of suffering. That's something worth celebrating. Let's not be sad anymore. It wouldn't make sense." So, they put aside their sorrow and resumed drinking and chatting. Su then asked Liulang, "Who will replace you?" Liulang replied, "My elder brother, keep an eye on the riverbank. Tomorrow at noon, a young woman will pass by here. She will drown while crossing the river. She's the one who will take my place." At that moment, both of them heard the village roosters crowing. Dawn was approaching, and ghosts couldn't stay on the shore. They had to return to the water. Thus, with reluctance, Liulang and Su bid farewell. The next day, Su returned to the riverbank, waiting earnestly to witness this strange event. Around noon, he indeed saw a young woman carrying a baby coming towards the river. The woman was about to cross the river when she slipped and fell in. In her panic, she managed to toss the baby onto the riverbank. The baby lay on the shore, kicking and crying. Meanwhile, the young woman struggled to stay afloat in the water. Unexpectedly, she managed to climb onto the riverbank, all wet and exhausted. She lay there for a long time, gasping for breath. Eventually, she picked up the baby and left. Seeing the young woman fall into the water, Su's heart ached. He wanted to rush over and save her immediately. However, he reconsidered, thinking that the young woman was supposed to replace Liulang. He hesitated and refrained from saving her. When the young woman finally climbed out of the water, Su began to doubt the accuracy of Liulang's words. Maybe he was being deceived. Come evening, Su was still fishing in the same spot. Liulang appeared again and said, "Now we can meet again. Let's not talk about parting for now." Su asked him the reason, and Liulang said, "The young woman has replaced me, but I pity the child she's holding. I don't want 2 lives to be lost because of me. Even though I'll continue to bear my punishment, I've decided to let her and the child go. I missed this chance, and who knows when there will be another person to take my place. Maybe it's fate that our paths haven't completely diverged. In my opinion, this might not be a bad thing. Touched by Wang Liulang's words, Su said, "You're a kind person. The divine beings will surely take note of everything you've done." From that day on, the two resumed their habit of drinking together. After a few days, Wang Liulang came to bid farewell again. Perplexed, Su asked if there was someone else to take his place. Wang Liulang said, "No one is replacing me this time. Last time, I showed compassion for the woman and her child, and the divine beings were aware of it. They see me as a kind person, willing to sacrifice myself to save others. They have appointed me as the local land god of Wuzhen in Xiaoqian County. I'll be taking up the position in a few days. If you miss me, you can visit Wuzhen to see me. Don't give up due to the long journey." Su was overjoyed by this news and said, "You're kind-hearted and righteous. Becoming a deity is truly heartwarming. But humans and gods inhabit entirely different realms. Even if I'm not afraid of the distance, how could I possibly meet you there?" Wang Liulang replied, "Just go without worry. You don't need to be concerned about the rest." Wang Liulang urged Su to visit him and then left. Su returned home and decided to pack his belongings to visit Wuzhen immediately and see Wang Liulang. His wife saw him packing and smiled, saying, "Xiaoqian County is hundreds of miles away from here. Even if there is a Wuzhen in that county, how can you talk to the clay statue on the altar?" Ignoring his wife's advice, Su went to Xiaoqian County. He inquired from the locals and indeed found Wuzhen. He located the township and stayed at an inn there. Su asked the innkeeper where the local land temple was. The innkeeper was surprised and asked, "Sir, is your surname Su?" Su replied, "Yes, it is." "How did you know my surname is Su?" The innkeeper continued, "Is your hometown in Sichuan County?" Su answered in astonishment, "Yes, it is." "How did you know?" The innkeeper didn't answer him but hurriedly went outside. In a short while, the men of the town, along with their wives and children, gathered at the inn's entrance. Even the girls crowded around, curious. Suddenly, the whole town gathered around the inn, forming a crowd so dense that movement became difficult. They surrounded Su, looking at him with warmth and surprise in their eyes. Su was startled and asked them why they had come here. They explained, "A few nights ago, we all dreamed of the land god at the same time. The land god told us, 'There is a friend of mine surnamed Su from Sichuan County who will come soon. When he arrives, please help him with some money. I will repay you all.'" It's strange that the entire town had the same dream. We are certain that the divine beings are asking for our assistance. So, we've all been waiting for your arrival here. Hearing this from the townspeople, Su was equally surprised. He immediately went to the land temple to offer prayers. Facing the clay statue of the land god, Su said, "Since we parted, I've thought of you day and night. Now that I've come from afar to fulfill our promise, I'm amazed that you guided the townspeople to help me financially through their dreams. I'm embarrassed that I don't have valuable gifts to offer you. The journey was long, and I only brought the wine we used to share by the river. If you don't mind, please accept it, just as we used to drink by the river. After the ritual, Su burned the ritual paper money. Soon, a gust of wind swept up from behind the god's altar, spinning for a while before dissipating. During that night, Su dreamt of Wang Liulang, who appeared well-dressed and completely different from his former ghostly self. Wang Liulang expressed gratitude to Su, saying, "Thank you for visiting me from afar. It's a pleasant surprise. However, as a minor deity now, I can't directly meet with you. Although we are close in distance, it feels like there's a great divide between us, which saddens me. The townspeople have offered you some modest gifts. Consider it a small token of my friendship. When you decide on a return date, I'll make sure to come to see you off." After spending a few days in Wuzhen, Su decided to return home. The locals warmly tried to persuade him to stay. They invited him for meals in the morning and drinks in the evening. Su had to accept multiple invitations each day. Eventually, he insisted on leaving, and the people came with gift lists and parcels, competing to bid him farewell with presents. Before long, the morning arrived, and the gifts from the townspeople filled a large sack. As he departed, the elderly and children from the town also came to bid him farewell. As Su left Wuzhen, a sudden whirlwind arose, accompanying him for over 10 miles. Su expressed his gratitude multiple times, saying to the whirlwind, "Liulang, please take care. You don't need to go to such lengths to see me off. You're a kind-hearted person. I believe you'll diligently protect the people here. You don't need my old friends' reminders anymore." The whirlwind circled on the ground for a while before gradually dissipating. The people of the town, seeing the whirlwind beside Su, were amazed once again. They speculated that it must be the land god. Consequently, the news spread quickly throughout the town. After returning home, Su's life gradually improved. He stopped fishing and started a small business. Whenever he encountered people from Xiaoqian County, he would ask about the land god of Wuzhen. They told him that the land god of Wuzhen was highly efficacious, responding to the wishes of those who came to worship. However, some later stories also mentioned that Wang Liulang's land temple was in Xiaoqian village, Zhangqiu County. It's unclear which version is accurate. At the end of the story, the author adds a commentary. Wang Liulang became a deity but never forgot his friend from his days as a water ghost. That's the reason he became a divine being. Yet today, how many officials riding in their carriages still care about their old, poor friends? In my hometown, there was a scholar from a poor family. He had a childhood friend who had become an official in the city, with a hefty salary. The scholar intended to seek a position from his friend, believing he would surely help. The scholar took all his money, packed his belongings, and traveled 1,000 miles to see his friend. But the result left him disappointed. He ended up spending all his money, selling his horse, and only then managed to return home. His humorous younger brother composed a song to mock his fruitless persistence. The song goes: "The moon rises, and the older brother returns. He takes off his marten fur hat. The umbrella isn't open, and the horse turns into a donkey. Only when the boots stop creaking." I shared this to bring a smile to everyone's faces. After all, becoming a divine being in this world is incredibly rare. The story concludes here. The story also mentions a role related to the land god's divine office. According to tradition, in ancient China, the land god was one of the widespread deities in Chinese folk belief. Most of them were appointed after their virtuous and kind lives during their mortal years. Their position in the divine hierarchy is lower than that of city guardians, but they still receive offerings from the living. Their primary responsibility is to protect local farmers, ensuring good harvests every year, ensuring the safety of travelers passing through the area, aiding businesspeople in successful endeavors, and ensuring that those buried in their domain are undisturbed. As a result, many Han Chinese citizens build small land temples around their villages and regularly offer prayers. This fascinating culture has persisted for thousands of years and continues to exist today. Mountain Ghost. There was a man named Sun Tai-bai who once told me a strange story. He said to me, "I remember my great-grandfather once shared an experience with my father, who then told me about it. Long ago, my great-grandfather studied at a temple called Liulang Temple, located in the South Mountain. One autumn, during the harvest season, he left the temple to visit his parents and stayed away for more than 10 days. When he returned to the temple, he found his study room covered in dust, and spiderwebs were everywhere on the windows. He called the servants to clean the room, and they worked until late evening to make it tidy again. Finally, my great-grandfather sat down, opened his luggage, arranged his bedding, and prepared to rest. He blew out the oil lamp, and the bright moonlight illuminated the room. Even without a light, everything was clearly visible. My great-grandfather lay on the bed, tossing and turning, unable to fall asleep. It was deep into the night, and the surroundings were quiet with no sound at all. Suddenly, a strong wind blew outside the door, and right after that, there was a loud noise from the main gate of the temple not far away. My great-grandfather thought, "The monks in the temple must have forgotten to close the gate. How careless." Just as he was thinking this, he heard the wind gradually approaching his room. A while later, his room door opened on its own. He was puzzled, and before he could figure out what was happening, the wind had already blown into the room. After the strong wind, my great-grandfather heard the sound of someone walking in boots. The sound got closer and closer to his bedroom from the study. Fear began to creep over him, wondering what would happen next. Then, the bedroom door opened, and my great-grandfather anxiously raised his head to look. To his horror, he saw a giant ghost hunched over, trying to squeeze into his room. The ghost quickly stood beside my great-grandfather's bed. Astonishingly, the ghost's head directly hit the ceiling beam. My great-grandfather looked up and saw the ghost's face, resembling a fully ripened pumpkin. Its two big eyes flickered around as if inspecting the surroundings. The giant ghost opened its enormous mouth, which was as large as a basin, and had only a few sparse teeth, each about 3 inches long. Its tongue moved in its mouth, making a hoo-hoo-hoo sound, and the sound resonated through the walls of my great-grandfather's bedroom. My great-grandfather was terrified. He thought there was barely a foot of distance between him and the ghost, and there was no escape. In this situation, he decided it was better to fight back and try to survive. He secretly pulled out a dagger hidden under his pillow and randomly swung it at the giant ghost. Surprisingly, the random swing struck the ghost's belly, making a sound like striking a stone basin. The ghost got infuriated, extending its huge claw to grab my great-grandfather. He moved slightly backward, avoiding the attack, and the ghost only grabbed the beddings. Without trying to grab my great-grandfather again, the ghost angrily left, still clutching the beddings. My great-grandfather fell on the ground as the beddings slipped away. He lay on the ground, afraid to get up, and called out loudly for help. The servants heard his cries and rushed in with lamps. They saw the room's door was still closed, so they opened the window and climbed in. When they saw my great-grandfather's condition, they were shocked. They helped him back onto the bed, and slowly, he recounted what had just happened. The servants searched the bedroom and study, and they found the bedding lodged in the doorway of the bedroom. When they opened the door and used a lamp to examine the beddings, they were astonished to find a claw mark on them, as big as a winnowing basket. Each of the 5 finger positions on the mark had 5 large holes, appearing to be claw marks. The next morning, my great-grandfather dared not stay in the temple any longer. He had to carry his books back home. Later, my great-grandfather went back to the temple to inquire if anything strange had happened again. The monks said that nothing unusual occurred. Biting the ghost. Once, a man named Shenlinsheng told me a bizarre tale. It happened on a hot summer day when his friend, an old man, was taking a nap inside his house. In his half-awake state, the old man saw a woman lifting the door curtain and entering. She wore white cloth on her head and was dressed in morning attire, heading straight to the living room. The old man squinted and assumed it must be a neighbor coming to visit his wife. But then he wondered why she would be dressed in morning clothes and why she barged into someone else's home like that. It was not normal at all. In a state of unease and fear, the old man saw the woman quietly entering his bedroom. He observed her closely and estimated her age to be around 30. Her complexion was sallow, with furrowed brows, and she had a frightening demeanor. The woman paced around the bedroom, refusing to leave, and slowly approached the old man's bed. He dared not get up and pretended to be asleep, sneakily observing her actions. After a while, the woman lifted her dress and climbed onto the bed, pressing down on the old man's belly as though weighing thousands of pounds. Though the old man was fully aware, he found himself unable to raise his hand or move his legs, as if they were tied down. Frightened, he tried to call for help, but no sound came out. The woman sniffed the old man's face with her nose, going over his cheekbones, nose, eyebrows, and even his forehead. Everywhere her mouth passed felt as cold as ice, and the old man suddenly felt a chilling sensation penetrating his bones. In this dire moment, he devised a plan. He waited for the woman to sniff the lower part of his face again, then seized the opportunity to bite her with his mouth. In a moment, the woman indeed sniffed near his cheek. The old man forcefully bit her cheekbone. He bit down hard, and his teeth sank into her flesh. The woman screamed and struggled in pain, but the old man refused to let go and bit even harder. Blood gushed from the woman's cheek, soaking the pillow and the bed. As the old man grappled with the woman, he suddenly heard his wife's voice from the courtyard. Desperate, he opened his mouth to call for help. The moment he let go, the woman swiftly and lightly fled. When his wife rushed into the bedroom upon hearing his cries, she found nothing unusual. She laughed heartily, believing her husband had just experienced a nightmare and was speaking nonsense. However, the old man detailed the strange incident to his wife and pointed to the bloodstains as evidence. Together, they examined the bed and found it soaked in blood, as if the roof had leaked during a storm. The old man sniffed the blood and found it extremely foul-smelling, causing him to vomit heavily. For days afterward, the foul odor lingered in his mouth. Xiaoqian. In ancient China, people believed that after death, humans would transform into ghosts and drift into another realm known as the underworld or Hades. However, there were certain ghosts unable to depart from the human realm due to various reasons. Some were held back by unfulfilled wishes, while others were constrained by powerful enchantments cast by magical creatures. These ghosts were quite pitiable, wandering the human world without a home or a place to settle. Nevertheless, many of them still harbored human emotions and even developed feelings for humans. As a result, Chinese legends from antiquity are filled with stories of love between ghosts and humans. And today, we are going to share one such tale. In ancient Zhejiang, there lived a man named Ning Xiaoqian. He was known for his generous and straightforward nature, as well as his upright and virtuous character. Ning Xiaoqian would often tell others, "Throughout my life, besides my wife, I will never actively engage with other women." One day, Ning Xiaoqian traveled to Jinhua City for some business. As he reached the outskirts of the city's northern gate, he spotted a temple and decided to step inside for a moment of rest. Though the temple was spacious with a towering pagoda, its courtyard was overgrown with waist-high wild plants, as if it hadn't been inhabited for a long time. The east and west sides of the temple, originally meant for monks' residence, were now deserted, with doors slightly ajar. Only a small room on the southern side caught his attention. Its lock appeared newly replaced. Gazing toward the eastern corner of the main hall, Ning Xiaoqian noticed tall bamboo, as thick as two hands held together. Beside the bamboo, there was a large pond adorned with lush lotus blossoms. Ning Xiaoqian was captivated by the tranquil ambience, and coincidentally, there was a scholarly examination taking place in Jinhua City. Given the expensive lodging costs in the city, Ning Xiaoqian decided to spend the night in the temple. As he strolled around the temple, he waited for the arrival of the monks. As twilight descended, a robust man entered the temple and opened the door of the southern room. Seeing this, Ning Xichen hurried over, greeted the man with respect, and explained his intention to stay at the temple. The man replied, "This temple lacks monks, and I am also seeking refuge here. If you don't mind the desolation, we could share this space and have a pleasant chat." Ning Xichen was pleased by the suggestion, and in no time, he found an empty room, laid hay on the ground as a makeshift bed, and set up a wooden board as a table, planning to stay for a while. That night, a bright full moon illuminated the sky, casting a pristine glow as if it had been freshly cleansed with clear water. Ning Xichen and the sturdy man sat by the corridor in front of the Buddha hall, passing the time in conversation. They introduced themselves, with the sturdy man saying, "I'm Yan Qixia, surname Yan and given name Qixia." Noticing the man's accent, Ning Xichen suspected he wasn't from Zhejiang. Curious, he inquired about the man's hometown, and Yan Qixia revealed he hailed from the Qin region. During their chat, Ning Xichen found Yan Qixia to be open and sincere, and he deemed him to be a good person. After a while, their conversation waned, and they bid each other farewell, retiring to their respective rooms to rest. Ning Xichen, being new to the surroundings, had trouble falling asleep. Eventually, he heard hushed voices coming from the northern side of the building, as if people were engaged in conversation. Intrigued, he crouched beneath the stone window by the northern wall, peering out to observe the scene outside. He saw a small courtyard with a woman in her 40s and an elderly lady. The old lady, fragile and dressed in faded red garments, adorned her hair with a large silver comb. They were chatting under the moonlight. The woman said to the old lady, "Why hasn't Xiaoqian come for so long?" The old lady chuckled. "She'll probably be here soon." The woman continued, "Has Xiaoqian ever complained to you, Grandma?" The old lady responded, "I haven't heard her complain, but occasionally she does seem a bit downcast." The woman remarked, "This girl doesn't listen, you don't need to be overly kind to her." Just then, a girl of 17 or 18 years walked over. She was exceptionally beautiful, defying description. The old lady saw the girl and said with a smile, "It seems we shouldn't gossip behind others' backs. We were just talking about you, and you, little enchantress, sneak in without making a sound. Thankfully, we didn't speak ill of you." The old lady continued, "You truly are a beauty. If I were a man, I would surely lose my mind over you." The girl responded, "Only if Grandma praises me would anyone say I'm good." Later, the woman said a few words to the girl, but her voice was too soft for Ning Xichen to catch the conversation. Ning Xichen presumed that these people were likely local women engaged in casual conversation. Assuming it was nothing out of the ordinary, he stopped listening to their conversation and returned to his room to sleep. As time passed, the distant conversation faded away. Just as Ning Xichen was about to fall asleep, he sensed someone entering his room. Startled, he sat up and surveyed the surroundings, only to find that it was the same girl from the northern courtyard. Puzzled, Ning Xichen asked her why she had come to his room. With a smile, the girl said, The moon is bright tonight, and I feel lonely by myself. I can't sleep, so I thought I'd sleep here with you. Ning Xiaoqian maintained a stern expression and said solemnly. You should be cautious of others' opinions, and I am also concerned about rumors. If we do something wrong, we will lose our integrity. The girl, however, seemed unconcerned and replied. It's deep in the night, and no one will know about this. This angered Ning Xiaoqian, and he scolded her a few more times. Even so, she still hesitated to leave and attempted to say something more to him. Raising his voice, Ning Xiaoqian reprimanded. Leave quickly. If you don't, I will call the person from the southern room. Hearing this threat, the girl became somewhat frightened, took a step back, and prepared to depart. Just as she was leaving, she turned back and placed a gold ingot on Ning Xiaoqian's bed. Ning Xiaoqian picked up the gold without hesitation and tossed it outside. He exclaimed, I want nothing to do with your money. Such ill-gotten wealth would taint my purse. The girl, looking ashamed, left the room, picked up the gold, and muttered to herself. This man's character is as unyielding as iron and stone. The next morning, a scholar and his servant arrived in Zhejiang from Luocha County to participate in the examination. They also chose to stay at the temple, taking up residence in the eastern wing. However, during the night, the scholar suddenly died of unknown causes. There was a small hole on the sole of his foot, as if it had been pierced by a needle, and blood seeped through the tiny opening. No one knew what had transpired during the night. Another night passed, and the scholar's servant also mysteriously died, exhibiting the same symptoms as the scholar. As evening approached, Yan Qixia returned, and Ning Xiaoqian questioned him about the strange events. Yan Qixia suggested that ghosts and demons might be involved. However, Ning Xiaoqian, who never believed in such supernatural beings, dismissed Yan Qixia's explanation. At midnight, the same girl entered Ning Xiaoqian's room again. She said to him, I've encountered many people, but none as morally upright as you. You're a good person, and I don't dare deceive you. My name is Xiaoqian, surname Nie. I died at the age of 18. My body was buried next to this temple, and my soul cannot depart. Later, I was threatened by demons to perform these vile deeds, disregarding my own shame to interact with the people living here. However, I never willingly engaged in these actions. Now that there are no more potential victims left in this temple, I fear the Ikshas will come. Ning Xiaoqian, feeling fearful, implored Xiaoqian for a solution. She suggested, tomorrow, go stay with the man surnamed Yan. This way, you can avoid calamity. Ning Xiaoqian then asked, why didn't you deceive Yan Qixia? Xiaoqian replied, he's an extraordinary individual, and I dare not approach him. Ning Xiaoqian further inquired, how do you usually deceive others? Xiaoqian responded, for those who want to get close to me, I secretly prick their foot soles with a needle. Once they're unconscious, I take the opportunity to draw their blood and provide it to the demons to drink. For those who don't get close to me, I use gold to entice them. However, those pieces of gold are actually made from the bones of demons. Those who choose to keep the gold, I will extract their hearts and livers. These are 2 methods to appeal to their desires. Ning Xiaoqian thanked Xiaoqian for revealing the truth and asked her when he needed to be cautious. Xiaoqian said, "Tomorrow night." As she was about to leave, she tearfully told Ning Xiaoqian, "I'm a sinner and will face the harshest punishments in hell. I might never find redemption. I know you are a kind and righteous person, and I believe you can help me find salvation. If you're willing to wrap up my bones and return them to your hometown for burial, I will do everything in my power to repay your kindness." Ning Xiaoqian firmly agreed. He then asked Xiaoqian where her remains were buried. Xiaoqian said, "Just remember a white poplar tree with a crow's nest. I'm buried beneath that tree." With those words, Xiaoqian left the room and disappeared in an instant. The following day, Ning Xiaoqian was afraid that Yan Qixia would go out, so he went over early to invite him to his own residence for a gathering. As dusk approached, Ning Xiaoqian prepared a table of food and invited Yan Qixia to share a drink. At the same time, he closely observed Yan Qixia's demeanor. Ning Xiaoqian suggested that Yan Qixia stay in the same room as him, but Yan Qixia declined, stating that he was reclusive and preferred solitude. Despite Yan Qixia's protests, Ning Xiaoqian insisted on moving all of Yan Qixia's belongings into his room. Yan Qixia had no choice but to move his own bed as well, sharing the same living quarters with Ning Xiaoqian. Yan Qixia cautioned Ning Xiaoqian, saying, "I know you're a good person, and I greatly admire your character. However, I have some things on my mind that I can't reveal at the moment. Please don't tamper with or inspect the contents of the box I've brought. If you go against my wishes, it won't benefit either of us." Ning Xiaoqian nodded in agreement. Not long after, both men lay down on their beds, preparing to sleep. Yan Qixia placed the small box on the windowsill and was soon snoring loudly. However, Ning Xiaoqian couldn't fall asleep due to fear. At midnight, there was a faint figure outside the window. Before long, the figure approached the window and peered in. Terrified, Ning Xiaoqian was about to call out to Yan Qixia when suddenly something burst through the window and flew out of the room. The object sparkled like a piece of white silk and shattered the window lattice. It then swiftly returned with a whoosh. The entire process happened as fast as lightning. Yan Qixia sensed the noise and sat up, while Ning Xiaoqian pretended to be asleep, secretly observing everything around him. He noticed that Yan Qixia took out the small box and examined its contents. Yan Qixia extracted an item from the box, faced the moonlight, and both smelled and gazed at it. The object was clear and shiny, about 2 inches long, and as wide as a chive leaf. After careful inspection, Yan Qixia wrapped the small item in several layers before placing it back into the already damaged box. He muttered to himself, "This old ghost is so audacious. It even broke my small box." He then lay back down to sleep. Ning Xiaoqian was astonished by what he had witnessed. He sat up and recounted everything to Yan Qixia, asking for an explanation. Yan Qixia said, "We've developed a strong friendship, so I'll tell you everything. I'm actually an exorcist. Today, if it weren't for this window lattice, the demon would have died already. However, it's already injured. Ning Xiaoqian inquired. What was the thing you wrapped up just now? Yan Qixia replied. It's my paired sword. I smelled it just now and detected demonic energy. Ning Xiaoqian wanted to see it, and Yan Qixia gladly showed him, revealing a small sword emitting a radiant light. As a result, Ning Xiaoqian's respect and admiration for Yan Qixia grew. The next day, Ning Xiaoqian noticed bloodstains outside the window. He left the temple and headed north, finding a field dotted with numerous graves. Sure enough, one grave mound had a white poplar tree growing on it, with a crow's nest on its branches. Ning Xiaoqian made up his mind. He packed his belongings and prepared to return home. Yan Qixia got wind of this and threw a farewell banquet for him. During the feast, Yan Qixia presented Ning Xiaoqian with a torn leather bag and said, "This is a sword bag. You should treasure it well. It can protect you from ghosts and evil spirits." Ning Xiaoqian expressed his desire to learn swordsmanship from him. Yan Qixia responded, "Someone as honest and upright as you is indeed suitable to learn swordsmanship. However, your destiny is one of wealth and prosperity. You won't end up like us." Ning Xiaoqian told others that he had a sister buried here and proceeded to unearth Xiaoqian's remains. He wrapped them in clothes and rented a small boat to take her home. Near Ning Xiaoqian's home was a barren land where he decided to bury Xiaoqian's remains. After burying Xiaoqian, Ning Xiaoqian faced the grave and said, "You lonely and unfortunate spirit, I've buried you near my home so that I can hear your singing and crying. If other spirits bully you, I'll come to drive them away. Please have some of this soup, even though it might not taste great. I hope you won't mind." After praying, Ning Xiaoqian turned to leave. Suddenly, someone called out from behind, "Slow down, wait for me." When Ning Xiaoqian turned around, it was Xiaoqian herself. She was smiling brightly and said to Ning Xiaoqian, "You truly are a man of honor. I would be willing to die 10 times over to repay your kindness. Please introduce me to your parents. From now on, I'm willing to be your servant or concubine and will never regret it." Ning Xiaoqian carefully observed Xiaoqian, noticing her fair and rosy skin resembling the glow of dawn, and her small feet were as slender as bamboo shoots. Xiaoqian's daytime appearance was even more beautiful than at night. So, he took Xiaoqian home with him. He instructed her to wait in the living room while he spoke to his mother. His wife had been bedridden due to illness, so his mother advised against revealing the situation to her to prevent her from being startled. As they were talking, Xiaoqian gracefully entered the room and knelt down. Ning Xiaoqian said to his mother, "This is Xiaoqian." His mother looked at Xiaoqian in surprise, unsure of what to do. Xiaoqian spoke to his mother, "I am a lonely and destitute spirit, far from my own parents and siblings. I am grateful for your son's kindness and am willing to marry him to repay his favor." His mother saw Xiaoqian's gentle and beautiful appearance and was no longer afraid, engaging in conversation with her. His mother said to Xiaoqian, "Young lady, if you're willing to take care of my son, I'll naturally be very happy. However, I only have this one son in my lifetime. I'm depending on him to inherit the family business and raise children. How could I let him marry a ghost? Xiaoqian replied. Respected elder, rest assured, I have no ill intentions. Since I, a deceased person, can't earn your trust, let's address each other as siblings for now. I'll live with you and serve you day and night. Is that acceptable? The mother felt sympathy for her sincerity and agreed. Xiaoqian wanted to meet Ning Seichen's wife, but his mother said it wasn't suitable due to her illness, so she dropped the idea. Instead, Xiaoqian immediately entered the kitchen to cook for his mother. She moved around the house as if she had lived there for a long time. In the evening, the mother still felt a bit uneasy about Xiaoqian and asked her to sleep in the grave instead of providing her a bed. Xiaoqian understood the mother's concern and left immediately. As she approached Ning Seichen's study, she hesitated to go inside, backing away instead. She hovered outside the door as if afraid of something. Ning Seichen invited her in, and she said, "There's a sword aura for exorcising demons in this room. That's why I didn't come out to greet you when you arrived earlier." Thinking it might be due to the leather bag Yan Qixia had given him, Ning Seichen took it down and hung it in another room. Xiaoqian then entered, sitting near the candlelight. After a while, Xiaoqian didn't speak a word. As time passed, she finally asked, "Do you still read at night?" "I used to read the Liulang Sutra when I was young, though I've mostly forgotten it now. Can you lend me a copy? That way, during my free time at night, I can read." Ning Seichen agreed, and Xiaoqian continued to sit in silence. By the late hours of the night, she still didn't want to leave. Ning Seichen urged her to go, but Xiaoqian sadly said, "I am a lonely soul dwelling in a foreign land. I truly fear returning to that desolate tomb." Ning Seichen responded, "But there's no spare bed in the room, and it's also best for us as siblings to avoid suspicion." Xiaoqian stood up, brows furrowed, her mouth twitching as if on the verge of tears. She raised her foot as if unwilling to leave, walking back and forth, and finally reached the doorway, disappearing down the steps. Ning Seichen felt great pity for Xiaoqian and wanted to let her stay in another room, but he was concerned about his mother's reaction. In the morning, Xiaoqian woke up early, greeted the mother, and brought her a basin of water for washing. She then attended to household chores in the yard. She was diligent, efficient, and everything she did aligned perfectly with the mother's wishes. As days went by, the whole family, including Xiaoqian, grew closer. The elderly mother even began to love Xiaoqian like her own daughter, forgetting that she was a ghost. Sometimes at night, the mother wouldn't let Xiaoqian leave and would have her stay the night. When Xiaoqian first arrived, she wouldn't eat or drink. But after half a year, she gradually started to have some thin gruel. Both the mother and son doted on Xiaoqian and never mentioned her being a ghost in her presence. The neighbors around them had no clue either. Before long, Ning Seichen's wife passed away. In private, the mother began to consider Xiaoqian as a daughter-in-law, yet she was still concerned that Xiaoqian might inadvertently harm her son. Xiaoqian sensed the mother's thoughts and took the opportunity to say, "I've been living here for over a year now. You should know by now that I mean no harm. I don't want to cause trouble for anyone anymore, which is why I followed Ning Xiaoqian here. I have no ulterior motive towards him. I simply know that he's an upright person, admired even by celestial beings. I only wanted to live here for 3 to 5 years, just to have a sense of belonging. That way, even when I go to the underworld in the future, I can proudly tell other ghosts that I was once someone's wife. The mother recognized Xiaoqian's sincerity but remained worried about her potential impact on her son's future family. Xiaoqian comforted the mother further. Children are blessings from above. Your son's destiny is one of wealth and prosperity. He'll have 3 sons who will honor the family's ancestors. None of this will be compromised by him marrying a ghost. The mother believed Xiaoqian's words and discussed it with her son. Ning Xiaoqian was delighted, so they hosted a lavish banquet and invited relatives and friends. During the feast, someone suggested that the bride be brought out to be seen. Xiaoqian readily stepped out in magnificent attire. The sight of Xiaoqian left the room in awe. Instead of suspecting she was a ghost, they considered her an ethereal fairy who had descended to earth. The news of Ning Xiaoqian's beautiful wife spread quickly, and family members from afar came bearing gifts to congratulate them. They competed to visit, hoping to become friends with Xiaoqian. Xiaoqian was also skilled in painting, particularly in drawing orchids and plum blossoms. She often gifted her artwork to relatives as a sign of gratitude. Those who received her paintings cherished them and took pride in possessing them. One day, Xiaoqian sat by the window with a worried and anxious expression. Suddenly, she asked Ning Xiaoqian, "Husband, do you remember that leather bag? Where did you put it?" Ning Xiaoqian replied, "I know you were afraid of it, so I stored it somewhere else." Xiaoqian said, "I've endured human vitality for a long time. I shouldn't fear it anymore. Today, it's best if you bring it and hang it by the bedside." Ning Xiaoqian found this strange and asked her about her intentions. Xiaoqian explained, "These past few days, I've been feeling uneasy. I suspect that the demon from Jinhua City, whom I escaped from, might come here sooner or later to find me." As a result, Ning Xiaoqian retrieved the leather bag. Xiaoqian examined it carefully and said, "This is a bag that gods use to store human heads. Look at how worn out it is. I can only imagine how many demon heads it has chopped off. Seeing it now still gives me goosebumps." She then had Ning Xiaoqian hang the leather bag by the bedside. The next day, Xiaoqian was still worried, so she asked Ning Xiaoqian to hang the bag on the front door. At night, Xiaoqian and Ning Xiaoqian sat facing each other. She warned Ning Xiaoqian not to sleep tonight. Suddenly, something resembling a flying bird dropped down, causing Xiaoqian to hide behind the curtain. Ning Xiaoqian took a look and saw the creature resembling a demon. It had 2 sparkling eyes like lightning and a blood-red tongue. The monster rushed towards the room with teeth and claws bared, but it stepped back a few paces upon reaching the door. It lingered outside for a while before daring to approach the hanging leather bag. The creature extended its claws to grab it, as if it wanted to tear the bag apart. Suddenly, the bag made a clattering sound and expanded to the size of a large basket. In a flash, it seemed as though a ghostly figure emerged halfway from the bag and yanked the demon inside. Then, all sound ceased, and the bag shrank back to its original size. Witnessing this scene, Ning Xiaoqian felt both fear and astonishment. Xiaoqian peeked out from behind the curtain and joyfully told Ning Xiaoqian, "It's over now. We're safe." They took down the bag together and discovered that there was only some clear water inside. A few more years passed, and as expected, Ning Xiaoqian passed the Imperial examination and became an official. Xiaoqian also gave birth to a son. Xiaoqian also encouraged Ning Xiaoqian to take a concubine. Within 2 years, both the concubine and Xiaoqian bore sons. Eventually, Ning Xiaoqian's 3 sons grew up to be outstanding officials, which elevated the reputation of the entire Ning family in the local area. Mural. Meng Longtan, a man from Jiangxi, and a scholar named Xu, came to the capital city to participate in the Imperial examination. Coincidentally, they both stayed at the same inn. Upon meeting, they decided to travel together. One day, the two of them strolled around the capital city and happened to enter a small temple. The temple appeared narrow, with cramped halls and rooms for the monks to reside. Inside the temple stood an old monk. They inquired if he lived at the temple, but the monk shook his head, explaining that he was a wandering monk and only temporarily staying there. Despite not being a permanent resident, the monk warmly welcomed them. Guiding them around the temple, the old monk explained its various aspects. As they reached the center of the Buddha hall, they saw a statue of a revered monk named Baoji, with exquisite murals adorning the walls on either side. The characters in the murals were lifelike and vivid. On the eastern wall, there was a depiction of a group of women showering flower petals from above. Among them was a woman with her hair loose, holding a flower in her hand, seemingly smiling. Her small cherry-like mouth appeared as if about to speak, and her affectionate eyes seemed to convey a message to the viewers. Scholar Zhu stopped in his tracks and gazed at the woman in the mural for a long time. Unknowingly, he was carried away by his thoughts and drifted into a trance-like state. Suddenly, he felt himself slowly floating up, as if riding on clouds and mists, and he flew into the mural. Once inside the mural, Zhu saw a myriad of palaces and buildings that seemed entirely different from the earthly world. Looking up, he noticed an old monk seated on the highest cloud, expounding Buddhist scriptures. Numerous other monks dressed in robes surrounded the old monk, attentively listening to his teachings. Zhu stood among these people. After a while, Scholar Zhu felt as if someone was secretly tugging at his sleeve. He turned around and saw the woman from the mural. She smiled at him faintly and then turned and walked away. Zhu lifted his feet and followed her. They passed through a winding corridor, and Zhu saw the woman entering a small room. He wanted to follow her inside, but he worried that it might be impolite, so he hesitated and stopped. At that moment, the woman turned back, holding a flower in her hand, and gestured for Zhu to come into the room. Overjoyed, Zhu quickened his pace and entered the small room with the woman. Inside the room, it was quiet and empty. Zhu boldly approached and embraced the young woman. Surprisingly, she did not resist, and the two of them began to coexist as if they were a married couple. After a while, the young girl stood up and walked outside. As she was leaving, she reminded Zhu not to cough or make any noise. In the evening, the girl came back again. This continued for 2 days. The young girl's companions noticed what was happening and came into the room to search for Zhu. When they saw him, they teasingly said to the girl, "Oh, your baby in the belly has grown so big already. Do you still want to keep your hair loose and pretend you are unmarried?" So, they all brought hairpins and earrings, urging the young girl to tie up her hair in the style of a married woman. The girl blushed and couldn't say a word in shyness. At that moment, one of them loudly said, "Sisters, we can't stay here all the time. It will make the guest unhappy." Hearing this, they all laughed and left the room, leaving Zhu and the girl alone. As Zhu looked at the girl again, he noticed that she had her hair tied up in a high bun, with hairpins gracefully adorning it. She looked even more enchanting and alluring than when her hair was loose. Slowly, he approached the young girl, wanting to kiss her. The girl's body emitted a fragrance like orchids or musk, captivating Zhu's senses. However, suddenly they heard the urgent and loud sound of boots and the clinking of chains from outside. It was followed by a cacophony of voices and commotion. After a while, the young girl got up from the bed in fright and together with Zhu, they secretly peered outside. There, they saw a messenger clad in golden armor, with a dark complexion, holding a chain and a large hammer. The other girls surrounded him. The messenger asked, "Is everyone here?" The girls replied, "Yes, everyone is here." The messenger continued, "If anyone is hiding a mortal, you must report it immediately and don't get into trouble yourselves." The heavenly maidens all responded in unison, "No one is hiding." The messenger then turned around, scanning the surroundings like an eagle, as if searching for something. Inside the room, the young girl was extremely scared, her face pale like ashes. She anxiously told Zhu, "Hurry, hide under the bed." She then opened a secret door on the wall and quickly escaped that way. Zhu crouched alone under the bed, terrified, not daring to make a sound. After a while, Zhu heard the sound of the messenger's boots coming into the girl's room. And shortly after, he left again. Not long after, the chaotic noise from outside gradually faded away. Zhu felt a bit relieved, but there were still people talking outside the door, causing him to remain fearful and anxious, hiding for a long time. Finally, he started experiencing hallucinations, feeling like cicadas were chirping in his ears, and stars were flickering before his eyes. The distressing sensations became unbearable for him. Yet, he had no choice but to wait quietly for the young girl to return. After some time passed, he couldn't even remember where he had come from. Meanwhile, in the main hall, Mang Longtan suddenly noticed that Zhu, who had been standing next to him, had disappeared. He became suspicious and asked the old monk about it. The old monk smiled and said, "He went to listen to the monk's Buddhist scriptures." When asked where the monks were explaining the scriptures, the old monk replied, "Just nearby." After a while, the old monk tapped on the mural on the wall and called out loudly, "Mr. Zhu, how come you have been gone for so long from the Buddhist lecture?" Surprisingly, Zhu's portrait appeared on the mural. He was standing still, tilting his head as if listening to something. The old monk called out again, "Your friend has been waiting for you for a long time. Come back quickly." And so, Zhu slowly flew out of the mural, feeling disheartened and terrified, landing on the ground. He sat down, feeling weak in his limbs. Meng Longtan witnessed all this with astonishment. He slowly asked Zhu what had happened. Zhu explained, "I was hiding under the bed, then suddenly heard a thunderous knock, so I went outside to see what happened. Unexpectedly, I found myself back in the mortal world in an instant." Zhu settled his mind and looked back at the mural. He saw the mural of the young girl holding flowers, and now her hair was tied up in a high bun. Zhu was astonished and respectfully bowed to the old monk, seeking an explanation for what had happened. The old monk smiled and said, "Hallucinations are created within a person's mind. How could I, a humble monk, possibly know?" Zhu felt frustrated at this point, as he couldn't make sense of what had just occurred. Meng Longtan, after hearing the conversation between Zhu and the old monk, was secretly amazed and filled with trepidation. In the end, both of them could only bid farewell to the old monk, leaving the temple behind with a sense of fear and confusion. At the end of the story, the author provides the following commentary. All hallucinations are born from the inner world of a person. It is like what wise people have said. When someone entertains impure thoughts, they will imagine indecent scenarios. When someone's mind is restless, they will generate terrifying illusions. Deities often offer guidance to ignorant humans, leading them to experience these illusions. And all these illusions originate from within a person's heart. The kind-hearted old monk in the story empathized with Mr. Zhu and earnestly advised him against entertaining wicked thoughts. However, Mr. Zhu remained entirely oblivious to the lesson. The story also reflects an ancient Chinese tradition. Before marriage, women would let their hair down and adorn it with decorations. After marriage, they would tie up their hair in a bun. This allowed people to easily distinguish whether a woman was married or not. Fengdu Imperial Censor. Outside the city of Fengdu, there was a cave. This cave was incredibly deep, and the local people believed that it was the entrance to the underworld, directly leading to the palace of the Emperor of the Underworld, Wang. All the instruments of punishment used in the underworld had to be created by humans nearby. Sometimes, people would find broken shackles or handcuffs scattered near the cave entrance. When this happened, the local magistrate would order blacksmiths to forge new instruments to replace the worn-out ones. Surprisingly, however, the new instruments placed there would vanish overnight. The expenses for providing these items would be reported to the higher authorities and deducted from the fiscal income. During the Ming Dynasty, there was an imperial censor named Hua Gong. In that year, when he was inspecting the city of Fengdu, he heard about this phenomenon. Huagong was a skeptic when it came to ghosts and gods, so he decided to enter the cave to see what was really happening and dispel his doubts. People warned him that it was very dangerous and he shouldn't go, but Huagong paid no attention. One day, Huagong took a torch and ventured into the cave, accompanied by 2 assistants. He walked for about a mile into the cave when suddenly the torch inexplicably went out. Huagong peered ahead and noticed that the surroundings had become bright, revealing broad steps. On these steps stood 10 grand halls, with almost every hall hosting an official. These officials were all dressed in court attire, holding ceremonial tablets used for court audiences. They appeared stern and dignified, but the easternmost seat in the halls was unoccupied. Upon seeing Huagong, the officials descended the steps to greet him, smiling and saying, "You've finally come. It's been a long time since we last saw you. Are you well?" Huagong, taken aback, asked. "Where am I?" The officials replied, "This is the underworld, the realm of the dead." Huagong was astonished and bowed deeply before turning to leave. The officials pointed to the empty seat and said, "That's your seat. Now that you're here, how can you leave?" Huagong was even more fearful. He pleaded repeatedly for the officials to spare him and allow him to return to the mortal realm. However, they said, "Your fate has brought you here. If it's fated to happen, how can you escape?" They then produced a scroll for Huagong to read. The scroll read, "On a certain month and day, a certain person returned to the underworld as a mortal." Huagong, after reading it, trembled in fear, feeling as if his body was immersed in ice water. He thought of his elderly mother and young children, and tears welled up uncontrollably. After a while, another person, adorned in golden armor and a divine appearance, held a document resembling an imperial edict and entered the hall. The officials in the hall bowed to the divine figure, and then listened as he read the contents of the document. Once the divine figure finished reading, the officials turned to Huagong and congratulated him, saying, "Congratulations! You have another chance to return to the mortal realm." Although Huagong couldn't fully comprehend what the divine figure was saying, seeing everyone congratulating him, he eagerly asked for an explanation. The officials explained, "We received an imperial edict from the heavenly emperor just now. The edict stated that a general amnesty is to be enacted in the underworld, so we can intercede on your behalf and allow you to return to the mortal realm." With that, they showed Huagong the way out of the underworld. Huagong followed the direction indicated by the officials. After walking a few steps, the surroundings turned pitch black again. Huagong couldn't discern the path anymore, causing him great distress. Just then, a dignified godly figure approached him. The godly figure had a red face, a long beard, and emitted a radiant glow. This dazzling light could illuminate the surroundings several feet away. Huagong hurried to the godly figure and paid his respects. The godly figure said, "You need to recite Buddhist scriptures in order to leave this place." After delivering this message, the godly figure vanished from Huagong's sight. Huagong thought, "It's been a while since I last recited Buddhist scriptures. I can hardly remember any, and Diamond Sutra is probably the only one I can recall. With that in mind, he began loudly reciting the Diamond Sutra. To his surprise, as soon as he started reciting, a beam of light appeared before him, illuminating the path ahead. He continued reciting and walking, occasionally stumbling over forgotten lines, which plunged him into darkness again. He would pause, meditating for a while, before remembering the lines and resuming his recitation, and the path ahead would light up once more. Hua Gong repeated this process of walking, reciting, and pausing until he finally emerged from the cave. However, when he exited the cave and looked back for his two assistants who had accompanied him, he realized they had disappeared without a trace. Yan Wang. Once upon a time in the village of Linxiu, there lived a man named Li Jiucheng. One day, he decided to venture into the wilderness with his own set of drinking utensils. He found a secluded spot and began to pour himself a drink. Suddenly, a gust of wind whirled around him, howling through the air. Li Jiucheng stood up as he saw the whirlwind and respectfully spilled his drink on the ground, offering it as a libation to the passing spirits and deities. He wanted to invite them to have a sip. Not long after, one day, Li Jiucheng went out for some matters. He saw by the roadside a mansion of great scale, with its houses appearing grand and solemn. At that moment, a servant emerged from the mansion and invited him in. However, Li Jiucheng declined and turned to leave. Unexpectedly, the servant blocked his way, insisting that he must enter. Li Jiucheng told the servant, "I am not acquainted with your master, you must have mistaken me for someone else." The servant smiled and said, "Sir, I haven't mistaken. You are indeed Mr. Li Jiucheng, and my master is inviting you inside." Curious, Li Jiucheng asked, "Who is your master?" The servant replied, "You will naturally find out once you go in." Helpless, Li Jiucheng could only step inside the gate. As he passed through the first entrance, he saw a woman. The woman's hands and feet were nailed to the door. Intrigued, Li Jiucheng approached for a closer look and realized that the woman was actually his sister-in-law. Li Jiucheng's sister-in-law had a strange ailment, a malignant sore on her arm, that had rendered her bedridden for over a year. Filled with astonishment and fear, Li Jiucheng wondered why his sister-in-law was in this place. But he also suspected that the invitation might have sinister intentions. With these thoughts in mind, he hesitated, halting his steps and not daring to proceed. Seeing his hesitation, the servant urged him to enter. With no other option, Li Jiucheng gathered his courage and walked in. Li Jiucheng approached the front of the grand hall and saw a person seated there. The person was dressed like an emperor, exuding an imposing aura, and had a fierce gaze. Li Jiucheng knelt down on the ground, not daring to lift his head to look up. The person instructed a servant to help Li Jiucheng up. Speaking gently, he said, "Don't be afraid. Not long ago, I enjoyed a bowl of wine you offered, and I was pleased by it. Today, I wanted to meet you in person to express my gratitude, and there's nothing else." Li Jiucheng finally felt at ease, though he still didn't understand the reasons behind this encounter. The person continued, Do you not remember the incident a few days ago when you poured wine as an offering in the wilderness?" Upon hearing these words, Li Jiucheng suddenly understood everything. He realized that the person before him was indeed the emperor of the underworld, Yan Wang, so he bowed down and kowtowed, pleading, "Just a moment ago, I saw my sister-in-law suffering harsh punishments. As her family member, I am deeply saddened. I implore you to have mercy on her and forgive her." Yan Wang spoke sternly. That woman was extremely cruel and jealous, deserving severe punishment. Do you know that 3 years ago, your brother's concubine, while giving birth, intentionally inserted a needle into the intestines of the concubine? That act has caused the latter to suffer constant pain in her abdomen to this day. Such malicious behavior has no humanity left. Li Jiucheng begged repeatedly, and finally Yan Wang said, "Very well. For your sake, I will forgive her. When you return, make sure to persuade that woman to change her ways." Li Jiucheng thanked Yan Wang once again and hastily left the grand hall. As he reached the gate, he realized that his sister-in-law had disappeared. After returning home, Li Jiucheng immediately went to visit his sister-in-law. She was lying on the bed, her hands and feet covered in severe ulcers that were oozing a lot of blood, staining even the Kong mat red. At that moment, his sister-in-law was angrily cursing due to the disobedience of a concubine. Seeing all of this, Li Jiucheng quickly tried to dissuade his sister-in-law, saying, "Sister-in-law, please don't continue like this. The suffering you're experiencing today is a result of the jealousy you've harbored." His sister-in-law, upon hearing Li Jiucheng's words, became very angry. She said to him, "Little brother-in-law, you truly are a good man. Your wife at home is so virtuous. She allows you to sleep around as you please, yet she doesn't dare utter a word of complaint. You must have great authority as a husband, but you won't stand up to discipline me on behalf of your brother." Li Jiucheng smiled and said, "Sister-in-law, don't be angry. If I were to reveal everything I know, I'm afraid you wouldn't even have time to cry." His sister-in-law retorted with frustration, "I have never stolen thread from the Queen Mother's needlework basket, nor have I engaged in any inappropriate behavior with the officials by Jade Emperor's side. I am at peace in my heart, so what reason do I have to cry?" Li Jiucheng lowered his voice and said, "However, you did insert a needle into someone else's intestines. What crime should that be considered?" His sister-in-law's face immediately lost color upon hearing this, and with a guilty tone, she asked Li Jiucheng about the basis of his statement. So, Li Jiucheng proceeded to narrate his experiences to his sister-in-law. Hearing Li Jiucheng's account, his sister-in-law was so frightened that she trembled uncontrollably, tears streaming down her face. She lamented to the sky, "I will never dare to do such things again." Unexpectedly, before her tears could dry, she felt the pain in her hands and feet disappear. And after 10 days, miraculously, the ulcers on her body began to heal. Since then, the sister-in-law completely changed her malicious behavior and became virtuous. Neighbors witnessed her newfound virtue and praised her greatly. A year later, the concubine gave birth to another child, and her intestines once again protruded. The attending midwife saw the needle clearly embedded there. The sister-in-law had the midwife remove the needle, and eventually, the abdominal pain of the concubine subsided. At the end of the story, the author includes the following commentary. Some believe that people with the kind of ruthless jealousy displayed by Li Jiucheng's sister-in-law are not uncommon in the world. Unfortunately, the punishments of the underworld cannot address each of them in time. However, I don't share this perspective. In my view, the punishments of the underworld might not be absent for those who commit wrongs. It's just that the message hasn't been relayed back to humanity. Speaking of this, it reminds me that the author also once told a short story about Yan Wang. In Liu County, there was a scholar named Li Zhongji. He was known for his upright and impartial character, earning respect from the people in the county. However, Li Zhongji suffered from a strange illness. He would faint every few days, becoming like a lifeless body, and only waking up after 3 or 4 days. Some people asked him if he went to the underworld when he fainted and what he saw there, but he always kept silent, never revealing a single word. At that time, there was another scholar in the county surnamed Zhang, who had the same peculiar ailment of fainting every few days. He once told others, "Li Zhongji is the emperor of the underworld, Yan Wang. I am his subordinate there." When asked about the couplet on the gate of the Yama's court, this Zhang scholar could even recite it from memory. Someone else asked him, "What did Li Zhongji handle in the Yama's court yesterday?" Zhang replied, "I cannot give you details, but I remember he interrogated Cao Cao and even gave him 20 lashes." In this story, the author also inserted his own commentary. He said, "Cao Cao, it's conceivable that dozens of Yan Wang have passed judgments on him. He has likely faced various forms of punishment as well. Logic dictates that he should have been sentenced long ago. But for thousands of years, they still can't officially convict him. Why is that? Could it be that even in death, most prisoners want to die painlessly? Yet, Cao Cao can't even get the chance to die. It's just to torture him and make him suffer more. It's truly strange." From the author's tone, it's evident that even after thousands of years, the people's hatred for Cao Cao has not diminished. Painted skin. In folklore, it's commonly believed that after death, humans might transform into ghosts, but not all ghosts and monsters are formed from human spirits. Some ghosts and monsters might originate from the waters or mountains, known as spirits. These entities often possess bizarre appearances, vastly different from humans, yet through prolonged cultivation, they've acquired human-like wisdom. Some malevolent spirits and creatures go to great lengths to assume human forms, seducing humans and seizing opportunities to harm or devour them. And today, we're going to talk about one such wicked creature. Please be advised. This story is rather spooky, so if you, like me, are afraid of ghosts and ghouls, I recommend listening during daylight hours. Also, be aware that certain parts of the story might make you feel uneasy. It's best to avoid listening during meal times. Once upon a time in Taiyuan, there was a scholar named Wang. Let's call him Wang Sheng for now. One early morning, as Wang Sheng was walking along the road, he noticed a young woman ahead of him, carrying a bundle and hurrying along with a look of distress. Wang Sheng hastened his steps and caught up with her. As he approached the woman and looked closer, he noticed that she appeared to be around 16 or 17 years old, exceptionally beautiful, which made him increasingly fond of her. Wang Sheng inquired, "Miss, why are you alone on the road so early in the morning?" The woman replied, "You're just a passerby, unable to share my worries, so why bother asking?" Wang Sheng insisted, "Well, what's troubling you? If there's a wish of yours that I can fulfill, I won't hesitate to help." The woman said with a sorrowful expression, "My parents were greedy for money and sold me to a wealthy family as a concubine. However, the primary wife of that household is extremely jealous. She often scolds and beats me day and night. I can't endure it any longer. Now, I just want to escape far away." Wang Sheng continued, "Where do you plan to go now?" The woman replied, "I'm a fugitive, so I don't have a definite destination." Wang Sheng said, "My home is not far from here. You can stay there temporarily, and I hope you won't mind the simplicity of my house." Unexpectedly, the woman agreed eagerly. Thus, Wang Sheng helped her carry her belongings and led her back to his home. As they entered the house, the woman looked around and noticed no one else was there. She asked Wang Sheng, "Why don't you have any family members?" Wang Sheng answered, "This is my study." The woman smiled and said, "This place is wonderful. If you're willing to show me kindness and let me live, I'll be extremely grateful. Please promise to keep it a secret and not reveal to anyone that I'm staying here." Wang Sheng readily agreed. That night, Wang Sheng unexpectedly ended up living with the woman in a manner similar to husband and wife. Wang Sheng concealed the woman in his study, and many days passed without any of their neighbors knowing. Eventually, Wang Sheng mentioned this matter to his wife. Upon hearing about it, his wife Chun suspected that the woman might be a concubine fleeing from a prominent family, and she advised Wang Sheng to send her away. However, Wang Sheng stubbornly refused. One day, while wandering around the market, Wang Sheng coincidentally encountered a Taoist priest. The priest was taken aback and asked him, "Have you met anyone unusual recently?" Wang Sheng replied, "No." The Taoist looked at him closely and said, "You're surrounded by evil energy. How can you say you haven't met anyone?" Wang Sheng vehemently defended himself, claiming that he hadn't encountered anyone strange. The Taoist, seeing Wang Sheng's stubbornness, sighed and left while muttering to himself, "I just don't understand. Even when faced with death, there are those who remain willfully ignorant." Wang Sheng found his words rather extraordinary and began to doubt the woman living in his house. However, he quickly dismissed his suspicions, thinking that the woman was clearly a beautiful and delicate young lady. How could she possibly be a monster? He thought to himself that the Taoist might have been trying to use the situation to extort money by pretending to exorcise spirits and monsters. Lost in thought, Wang Sheng arrived at his own front gate. He found the door locked from the inside, preventing him from entering. He started to doubt the woman's actions and, climbing over a broken wall, jumped into the yard. To his surprise, the door to the study was also tightly shut. He stealthily approached the window and peered inside. He saw a grotesque and ferocious demon standing in the center of the study. The demon had a bluish complexion, sharp and long teeth resembling saw teeth. It was spreading out a piece of human skin on the bed and using a colorful brush to paint on it. After finishing the painting, the demon tossed aside the brush, lifted the human skin, and draped it over itself. In an instant, the hideous demon transformed back into a beautiful woman. Seeing all of this, Wang Sheng was overcome with fear. His legs went weak, and he couldn't stand. He crawled out like a wild animal. He fled the yard and immediately went searching for the Taoist he had met earlier. However, the Taoist was nowhere to be found. Wang Sheng searched everywhere and finally encountered the Taoist in the outskirts. Falling to his knees before the Taoist, Wang Sheng earnestly begged for help. The Taoist agreed, saying, "All right then. Let me drive it away." However, this demon has also cultivated for a long time, and it just found a suitable piece of human skin for shaping. It could easily reincarnate as a human. I can't bear to just destroy it like this. The Taoist handed Wang Sheng a duster and instructed him to hang it at the entrance to his bedroom. As they parted, the Taoist agreed to meet Wang Sheng at a nearby temple after the matter was resolved, where Wang Sheng would return the feather duster to the Taoist. After returning home, Wang Sheng was too afraid to enter his study and could only retreat to his bedroom. He hung the duster at the entrance of his bedroom as instructed. At midnight, he suddenly heard rustling sounds outside the door. Wang Sheng was so frightened that he couldn't even bring himself to look, so he had his wife secretly take a peek to see what was happening. His wife peered out of the window and saw the woman from the study approaching the bedroom. The woman looked up and saw the duster hanging at the entrance. She dared not enter and stood outside, seething with anger. She glared at the duster with frustration for a long time before finally leaving. However, after a while, the woman returned. She shouted angrily, "That Taoist is trying to scare me. I won't give up so easily. Should I spit out the meat I've eaten?" After speaking, she unexpectedly took down the feather duster and tore it into pieces, then slammed into the bedroom door, charging inside. As soon as the demon entered the bedroom, it climbed onto Wang Sheng's bed, tore open his chest, and dug out his heart before leaving. Wang Sheng's wife saw all of this and began to cry out in high-pitched wails. Hearing the cries of his wife, the servants rushed into the bedroom with candles. They saw Wang Sheng lying dead, his abdomen a mess of blood and flesh. Wang Sheng's wife, Chen, suppressed her screams and cried in extreme horror, but she could only swallow her tears. Early the next morning, Chen sent Wang Sheng's younger brother, Liulang, to inform the Taoist. When the Taoist heard the news, he said indignantly, "I pitied that demon for having cultivated a human form, but I never expected it to become so brazen." So, the Taoist immediately accompanied Wang Sheng's younger brother to Wang Sheng's house. However, they discovered that the demon had already disappeared. The Taoist looked around and said, "Luckily, it hasn't gone far." Then he asked, "Who lives in the southern courtyard?" Wang Erlang answered, "It's my family's residence." The Taoist said, "The demon is in your house now." Wang Erlang was greatly astonished, thinking there was no way that could be true. The Taoist asked him, "Has an unfamiliar person ever been to your house?" Wang Erlang replied, "Early this morning, an old lady came to our house. She wanted to be a servant, and my wife took pity on her and allowed her to stay. She's still at our house and hasn't left yet." The Taoist said, "That's right, it's her." So everyone went to Wang Erlang's house together. The Taoist held a wooden sword and stood in Wang Erlang's courtyard. He shouted towards the house, "Evil demon, return my duster." The old lady inside the house heard the shouts from outside and panicked. She rushed out of the house, intending to escape. The Taoist caught up to her and struck her with the wooden sword. The old lady was knocked down, and her skin split open, revealing the true form of the demon. It lay on the ground, wailing like a pig. The Taoist then chopped off the demon's head with the wooden sword. The decapitated demon turned into a thick smoke and gathered into a pile on the ground. The Taoist took out a gourd, removed the stopper, and placed it in the smoke. There was a swooshing sound from the mouth of the gourd, as if someone were inhaling. In an instant, the smoke was completely sucked into the gourd. The Taoist plugged the gourd with the stopper and put it into his bag. Everyone then looked at the piece of human skin on the ground and saw that it had eyebrows, eyes, hands, and feet. The Taoist rolled up the piece of human skin as if rolling up a painting. After rolling it up, he placed the skin into his bag, said his goodbyes, and prepared to leave. Witnessing all of this, Wang Xing's wife, Chen, knelt before the Taoist, crying and begging him to use his magic to bring her husband back to life. The Taoist shook his head, indicating that he was incapable of doing so. Chen was even more distressed, kneeling on the ground and refusing to stand up. After contemplating for a moment, the Taoist said to Chen, "My magic is too limited to bring the dead back to life. I know someone who might be able to help you. You could try seeking his assistance." Chen asked, "Who is this person you're referring to?" The Taoist replied, "There's a madman in the market. He often lies in the filth. You can try begging him while kowtowing. However, if he insults you or goes into a frenzy and hits you, don't get angry." Wang Erlang was also familiar with the madman, so after bidding farewell to the Taoist, he went with his sister-in-law, Chen, to find the madman. They arrived at the market and saw a beggar begging for food, singing songs in a crazed manner. The beggar's nose was running, and his body emitted such a foul odor that it was unbearable to approach him. Upon seeing the beggar, Chen knelt down and moved her knees forward to his side. The beggar smiled and said to her, "Beautiful lady, do you love me?" Chen ignored him and proceeded to tell him about everything that had happened. The beggar laughed heartily and said, "Anyone can be your husband. Why bother saving him?" Despite this, Chen continued to plead. The beggar said, "Strange. Even in death, people come to me to be resurrected. Am I the king of hell? With that, he angrily struck Chen with his begging stick. Enduring the pain, Chen withstood his strikes. At this point, the surrounding bystanders were confused about what was happening, and they began to gather around. The crowd in the market gradually grew, forming a wall of onlookers. The beggar yelled curses and even coughed up phlegm and saliva. He caught the saliva in his hand and, within moments, had a handful of it. The beggar raised the saliva-covered hand to Chen's mouth and told her, "Eat it." Chen's face turned bright red, showing her embarrassment and discomfort. However, she remembered the Taoist's advice not to be afraid of humiliation, so she forced herself to swallow the repulsive saliva bite by bite. She felt the phlegm moving down her throat, forming a lump that got stuck in her chest, unable to go any further. The beggar laughed again and said, "Beautiful lady, do you love me?" With that, he stood up and left, paying no more attention to Chen. Chen and Erlang followed the beggar to the temple, hoping to get closer to continue their pleas. However, as soon as the beggar entered the temple gate, he disappeared without a trace. Despite searching everywhere, they could not find the beggar anywhere. Frustrated and embarrassed, Chen and Wang Erlang returned home. Back at home, Chen was overwhelmed by grief at her husband's tragic death and the humiliation of having ingested someone else's saliva. She wailed to the heavens and begged for her own death. She wanted to clean the blood from her husband's body and prepare his body for burial, but her family members were too frightened to come near and stood at a distance. Chen had no choice but to pick up Wang Sheng's lifeless body and remove the organs that were hanging outside of his belly. As she cleaned, she sobbed loudly. When her cries became hoarse, she felt a strong urge to vomit. The lump in her chest suddenly surged up from her throat. She couldn't turn her head in time, and the thing she had expelled from her mouth ended up inside Wang Sheng's chest cavity. To her astonishment, she realized that she had actually spit out a human heart. The heart was pulsating thump-thump within Wang Sheng's chest, emitting heat. Chen was utterly surprised and quickly used her hands to close Wang Sheng's chest. She squeezed the chest tightly together with her hands. If she relaxed her grip even slightly, she could see tendrils of hot air escaping through the gaps. Once she sealed the chest, Chen tore the bedding on the bed into strips and wrapped Wang Sheng's chest and abdomen tightly. At this moment, she touched Wang Sheng's body with her hands and noticed that it was gradually becoming warm. She then covered Wang Sheng with a quilt. In the middle of the night, she got up to check on Wang Sheng and discovered that he was already showing signs of breathing through his nostrils. The following morning, Wang Sheng miraculously came back to life. He said to Chen, "I had a dream that felt so vague. Now, I only feel a slight pain in my abdomen." He opened his clothes and looked at the spot where he had been wounded. He found that there was only a scar the size of a copper coin. Not long after, Wang Sheng's health miraculously recovered. The author concludes the story with a commentary. He says that people in the world can sometimes be truly foolish. Just like Wang Sheng, he clearly knew that the woman was a demon, but because of her beauty, he deceived himself into believing that she wasn't. Foolish people can be so stubbornly deluded. Even though the Taoist had given him advice, he was unwilling to believe it. However, he was captivated by her beauty, and his wife even had to endure punishment by ingesting someone else's saliva. Good and evil aspects of human nature will receive corresponding rewards according to the laws of heaven. It's just that those who are foolish and confused can never seem to wake up, which is truly pitiable. As we conclude the first collection of stories from Strange Stories from a Chinese Studio. If you enjoyed it, please give us a thumbs up and subscribe. We'll see you in our next episode.